Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam's First Look, and this week we're going over UFC Vegas 99. It's going down live from the Apex Center in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we're expecting a very fun main event. In the main event, you know what I'm talking about. We got middleweight contenders facing off, and we've got on one side Michel Demolidor Pereira. He's the underdog for just the second time in his lengthy UFC career, and he's taking on Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. If you guys have been listening to the show for a long time, you know I've modeled a lot of my own grappling style after a guy like Fluffy Hernandez. Pace, pressure, front headlocks, looking to advance position, looking to threaten with the guillotine choke constantly. A lot of things that I think are really good, smart tactics for the MMA meta, but also things that you could bring to bear in grappling context. So I'm very excited about this fight card. I'm very excited to talk about this main event matchup, but there's a lot of sneaky fights on here as well. The return of Charles Johnson, one of the hottest fighters right now in the UFC, coming off some knockout victories, some impressive stuff. He's got 2 knockouts in the UFC, looking to make it 3 against Sumudaerji. But on the other side, Sumudaerji kind of got his back up against the wall, right? Really needs this victory. So a lot of high-stakes matchups, and I'm really excited to break them all down with you guys. I want to say first and foremost, thank you to everybody who's rocking with us. We're a little bit late here. I just want to say, shout out to Keesmus911 in the chat, says the volume is a bit low. The volume is a bit low. I've been having a problem with my microphone, guys. I think there's something that's been, a bug with my microphone. I've had it for several years. So right now I'm in the research process. I'm looking for a new microphone. I'm looking to see what I'm going to do in terms of a new audio solution. But there's been a bunch of people saying in the chat at various points that they've been having a harder time hearing. So I apologize if you've got to crank up the volume. That's on my end, and I do apologize for that. However, a lot of people also say if they come out and come back in, things like that, that the audio works fine. So I'm not sure what the hang-up is. I don't know if it's a StreamYard problem. I do have StreamYard Premium, or a microphone problem. I have a nice microphone that's worked well for a long time. But I think, unfortunately, all good things come to an end. Whether it's a new wire or a new microphone, I'm going to have to figure out a better audio solution so we have fewer problems moving forward. But I am aware of them, and I am working on it. I'm just not a great audio guy. I'm not a great tech guy. So I'm working on that, and I don't want to pay for the wrong thing. So I'm doing my research, doing my due diligence, and then we will be getting a new microphone. Shout out to Big Chankala, as well, says get a new mic. Absolutely. It's time to upgrade and move on. But in the meantime, we're going to have to make do with what we have. And unfortunately, I already tested it with my guy Gordo, and the other solutions that I have for audio right now don't sound much better, right, in terms of whether I talk through the headphones or certain things like that. So we're going to make do with what we've got and push on through, and hopefully we can still make it a great show for everybody. So with that being said, let's start off like we always do on the first look, which is with this main event of the evening, guys. So if you are new here, we always start off the first look by talking about some first thoughts on these fighters, right? We do look at the betting lines. We try and talk about if anything jumps out at us. However, I'm going to do a little bit more tape study, due diligence. I'm going to then write every single fight on the card, right? There's 11 matchups on this card. That's a lot of tape. There's some people like Melissa Martinez, Elise Ardelean, people on the prelims that I'm going to have to dig a little bit deeper to even refresh my memory on these fighters. They're not extremely memorable to me. Whereas these fighters in the main event, I could just talk about them off the top of my head. So for, all intents and purposes, give me until tomorrow when I try and come back to you guys, typically with a great guest. I will break down all these fights in a little bit more depth, a little bit more tape study references. However, tonight we want to get into the action and see exactly what we're dealing with this weekend at the UFC card. So first and foremost, guys, a couple of things jump out when we talk about this main event, and we are going to go ahead and show on our screen what we're talking about. So we're talking about UFC Vegas 99. It's going down on Saturday night, and Michel Demolidor Pereira, 31-11, guys, an extremely lengthy record, and he's 31 years of age. So, oh boy, right? You look at that and you just say to yourself, man, as far as like long-term angles that I look at, I'll just tell you guys, one of them that I always think about is, can I get a younger fighter, or in this case, a fighter at virtual age parity, right? They're both very similar in age. A fighter at age parity with a bounty more professional experience. Typically, that is something I look at as a real positive. Now, when you have somebody like Michel Pereira, and he's lost 11 professional fights, then you want to temper, the expectations just a little bit. You want to say to yourself, you know what? maybe there's something about the style, maybe there's something about the approach that's going to be a little bit dangerous if I back a guy like that and I don't know what I'm getting myself into. So I think when you look at the Michel Pereira side, there are some things that jump out as just positives on paper, right? First and foremost, he's a little bit bigger in terms of height. When you look, he's a former welterweight. You'd never know it. He stands next to former middleweight champion Sean Strickland, and I posted this picture on my X account, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. If you go to my account at Liam Picks Fights, you can find me everywhere at Liam Picks Fights. It's a really jarring image to see that he looks much bigger than Sean Strickland. He trains a lot at Extreme Couture these days in Las Vegas, and what we've seen from Michel Pereira, and we're going to talk about Michel Pereira as the first fighter that we reference on the card tonight. And he comes into this fight, he is the underdog. He's on an 8-fight winning streak, very lengthy. And you're looking at a guy in Pereira who's 9-2 in the UFC. That's nothing to sneeze at, right? That's a very, very good record. And you look, he's got a pretty balanced win rate as well. You look at the fact that he's got 2 wins by knockout, 3 wins by submission, 4 wins by decision, 1 loss via decision. That was a gas-out performance against featherweight Tristan Connolly, and then 1 disqualification in a fight he was winning against Diego Sanchez that was really just a boneheaded decision by Michel Demolidor Pereira. But what you see from the guy is that he's had a pretty overall solid win rate, and what happened is he was supposed to fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. If you guys remember this fight, he was booked to fight him. Then he misses weight, and it was a real problem. And Wonderboy decided, I will not take... people are saying the sound is way off. Let's see if I can improve it at all. Lord willing. If you guys have to turn it up, I do apologize. But I'm trying my best. I'm speaking loud and clearly into the microphone. If it's, unusable, let me know, and we'll switch to a little bit worse audio quality on my computer and just figure it out from there. But hopefully we can push through here. In any case, we had Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, and that kind of showed a little bit of lack of discipline for the 170 class, but also, like I mentioned, he was one of the biggest welterweights on the roster. So people are now saying they can hear me fine. It's a little bit lower than usual. Yeah, guys, at the end of the day, I apologize for the audio quality, but it's just going to be what it'll be. So if you have to, turn it up. If you can't, I apologize, but it's just got to be what it's got to be. I'd rather just keep pushing forward. So God bless. Thank you. Thank you for the heads up, but we'll have a new microphone soon, and we'll work on the audio settings there. Let me just make sure that the audio is all the way up on my end. Yeah, it says that it's all the way up, so that's what we could do. We're going to talk about the fights, and we'll keep things up on the screen. We'll reference some visuals as well, so you guys get a good idea, and hopefully we can give some really good information throughout the course of the show that makes up for the poor audio quality. So I do apologize for that, though. That is something that I try and keep a high standard on, and I apologize when I fall short of that. All right, guys. Looking at it, I'm saying to myself, okay, he misses weight here, and then what has happened since? He fights Andre Petroski, and Petroski, you can like him or not like him, but he does have a fairly solid record in the UFC, 7-2, and you could pick that apart. He does have some awkward knockout losses, but he lost to Michel Pereira when he moved up to 185 pounds, and then he lost to Jacob Malkoun in back-to-back fights, and those are both pretty tough guys with good winning records in the UFC. So I don't hold that against him too much. And then you look at the Michal Oleksiejczuk fight, that was kind of just a free win for Michel Pereira. I really apologize to everybody that listens to my betting advice that I didn't bet on him by sub. I came on this show and talked about how the best bet on the fight was plus 575 against Michel Demolidor Pereira against Michal Oleksiejczuk, and then he submitted him instantly, and I didn't have the ticket, and I was disgusted. Then you look at the Ihor Potieria fight, and I thought Ihor was at least going to compete in that fight, and he got barnstormed so early that he never even had a chance. So we've seen a really good win streak so far from Michel Demolidor Pereira. Does it blow your hair back, the quality of competition? Maybe not. You say, okay, these guys are just average, to below average UFC middleweights. Fair enough. But has he treated them accordingly? I mean, absolutely, right? He went out there and just blew them all out of the water in the first round. And one of the things that has stood out to me as well is this guy has been favored in the vast majority of his UFC fights. So we've seen that Michel Demolidor Pereira is rocking the 9-2 record. So he's went out there 11 times in the promotion. And if you go and look at his previous performances in his odds range, which I was working on that document earlier today, this guy is 8-2 as a UFC favorite, right? He dropped the ball as a -435 against featherweight Tristan Connolly, and he dropped the ball as a -149 via disqualification against Diego Sanchez. That was in 2020, February of 2020. Since then, guys, he has not lost in the UFC. He's rattled off a, like I said, 8-fight win streak. And what's most impressive about that fact is the fact that you look and he's gone and rattled these all off as a favorite. -135 versus Salim Madaev, won by sub. -112 against Chaos Williams, won via decision. -152 against Nico Price, won via decision. Although he could have been disqualified there for the backflip head kick. You guys know what I'm talking about if you're old school heads. Then you look at the -278 against Andre Fialho. He's like the only guy to not knock out Fialho, which is hysterical. However, he still went out there and got the win, so hats off to him. Then you look at the next fight. He goes out there against Ponzinibbio, -130, split decision win. Then you look at the next fight. He goes up to middleweight, -189 against Andre Petrosky, KO in the first round. Michal Oleksiejczuk, -147, wins via sub in the first round. Then against Ihor Potieria, -476, wins via sub in the very first round. So this guy has gone out there, rattled off a great win streak, won a lot of fights via decision, right? Close decisions, eked them out. They were all at 170. Since going up to 185, deliverance, deliverance, deliverance. All three of them in the first round. So now he's got by far his toughest fight at middleweight. But if you just go back and look, the last time he was an underdog, guys, it was against Danny Roberts, right? So let's go ahead and look for just 1 second. He was an underdog of +220 against Danny Roberts. He won via knockout in the very first round. That was his UFC debut. He has not been an underdog of this size ever since. So this guy, Michel Demolidor Pereira, has essentially earned some respect at the betting window. He continues to go out there and do a very good job, landing these strikes and doing just enough, whether it's mixing up the wrestling and the grappling, to find a way to win. Now, here's the differences. Was he knocked out at 185 pounds? You bet your bottom dollar he was. I posted it before, and I said it's because it was outside the UFC. This result has been memory hold, but he was knocked out in the first round via punches against Dusko Todorovic in 2018. So that is something to keep in the back of our mind. He has been defeated outside of the UFC many times. He was defeated by Carlston Harris, notable name, in 2015 via unanimous decision. So he's a tough guy, right? If you look back, he's been finished just twice in his lengthy career. He was defeated via KO once, he was defeated via submission once, and he was disqualified one time. But he's a guy that's had a really solid record overall. And if you look, most of his losses in his career are via decision. I am trying to just scroll through and see if pre-UFC he was scheduled to go 5 rounds. Yeah, he was scheduled to go 5 rounds, and there was a no contest rear naked choke result in the Heat promotion back in 2018. So I do want to watch that fight and see how that was going, because he did make it the full 5 rounds there, even if the fight got finished in the 5th round. But otherwise, it does not look like he's been scheduled for 5 rounds other than that. Even though he's won some tournaments and some championships, it seems like most of these fights were scheduled 3 5-minute rounds, according to Tapology. So I'm going to try and find that Heat fight, and I'm also going to just look back and see the most recent fights he's had that went to decision. He's a guy that, in my opinion, is going to struggle with the pace of Fluffy in an extended fight, because everybody is going to struggle with the pace of Fluffy in an extended fight. The guy has an insane ability to keep people working through this cycle where he's going takedown, going to the back, going to the arm triangle, going to these different locks. And I've seen a lot of really effective holds from Fluffy over the course of his career that he's used to great effect against really high-level grapplers. So we're going to talk about Fluffy here, but what I wanted to just get across as my point is I do think you have a live underdog in Michel Demolidor Pereira. Why? Because now let's talk about his opponent and how they match up. I think that in a long, extended fight, we should be favoring a guy like Fluffy because we know that he can push a hellacious pace. We know that he is willing, able, wants to go into these deeper fights, wants to keep pushing. I've seen him fight for 5 rounds against Brendan Allen. I have notes on that fight. It's hysterical, some of the commentary. I've tweeted it out before. You guys can go look that up if you're so interested on Twitter. I think just type in @LiamPicksFights and commentary, and it should come up. It was Pat Miletich on commentary talking about this guy is on his back like a hooker on rent day or something like that. It was just hysterical. Pat Miletich, very funny on commentary. Wild boy, Pat Miletich. But in any case, guys, if you look at Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, 6-2 in the UFC, no record to sneeze at, and he's fought serious opposition pre-UFC, right? If you look, he fought prior to coming to the UFC, Brendan Allen, Mike Persons, and then Preston Snook. Those are all guys that had positive winning records at the time he fought them. He had a pretty solid decorated amateur record as well. Went out there, I believe 9 times and got the victory as an amateur. So he's a guy with a decorated record. He's fought a lot of times. Still not as many times as a guy like Michel Demolidor Pereira, but an experienced martial artist nonetheless. Fought some high-level opponents. Then you look at his UFC run. He went out there and absolutely starched Jordan Wright after beating Brendan Allen in a very impressive and fun back-and-forth 5-round decision where he showed off his grappling chops and his cardio, but he did show off his ability to make mistakes and his ability to end up in bad positions. And that's happened again in more of his recent fights. We'll talk about them. So if you look, the Jordan Wright fight, he went out there and just knocked Jordan Wright out really easily, made it look like a very simple fight, and God bless him for it, right? That's kind of what you're supposed to do if you're a title contender type guy. If you're a guy who wants to be in the top 5 and the top 10 against a guy like the Beverly Hills Ninja, you got to go out there and deliver him early, and he did that. But then he comes off that fight, and it's overturned to a no contest because of a marijuana drug test. So if you guys are like me, you don't really hold that against him, right? It was just a silly way for him to get hemmed up by the authorities. But in any case, he ends up getting past that, no problem. So then he goes on and he fights Marcus Maluco Perez. And if you guys haven't been watching all that long, maybe you don't know who Marcus Maluco Perez is. Not the best fighter you've ever seen, right? He had some decent skills, but a lot of janky movements, a lot of, he's a very middleweight fighter, right? Like he goes out there with some techniques to kill on the feet. He'll do some spinning shit, but most of it's pretty meme-like, and when it doesn't get going, he tends to get going from the fight. He had a lot of struggles in the UFC. If we go pull up his record, Marcus Maluco Perez, guys, ended up 2-5 in the UFC, and one of his wins, unfortunately, was over our guy Fluffy Hernandez. So that's the one thing I always want to say when we want to just temper the expectations just a little bit. If you go back and look in that fight, he actually was able to defeat him via anaconda choke, and it was set up with strikes. So he went out there and he set it up with the strikes in the feet. He kind of hurt Fluffy a few times, and then he was able to get to his front headlock series on the ground. And if you look at his record, he did have a very respectable 8-0 record to the submission. So he was no punk on the mat. He was only finished with strikes 1 time in his career, but 5 times he was defeated via decision, including 4 times in the UFC. So if you were able to extend the fight with Marcus Maluco Perez, typically that meant you were able to go out there and get your hand raised. Dricus du Plessis was able to knock him out in the first round. You do not hold that against him. But then he moved on to pillow fighting. He did lose to Zach Pauga in Cage Warriors as well. So a couple things that stand out is maybe not great looks for Marcus Maluco Perez, especially on the way out. And again, one of the wins he was able to get was over our hero, Fluffy Hernandez. So I want to acknowledge, I love Fluffy. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's worthy of our respect and admiration. But we also got to be realistic and say, have we seen, flaws in the past before that could be exploited again? And I think the answer is yes. To the body, he can be susceptible. And that front headlock game, it goes both ways, right? If you've got a great front headlock, you do know the intricacies, the ins and outs of trying to defend it. But if you're in a position where you get hurt really badly, we always talk about if you get hit once, the black belt turns into a brown belt. You get hit twice, it turns into a purple belt, and so on and so forth. Lance is saying the sound is low. I'm aware it's low. We're just pushing through, my man. I encourage you to turn up the sound. It's probably not going to get much higher. I'm trying my best. We've got a good quality microphone that I invested some money in, and unfortunately, it's starting to shit the bed on me. So we're working on getting a new one. We're doing our research, but I just don't want to jump in and get a new mic that doesn't sound perfect. So I got to pin an audio warning, says Woo. I'm trying. I'm trying here, but what I'll always say is I do have a ton of written research. I put out an article each and every week, all this stuff. If the audio is unbearable for you, but I'm just going to push through and try my best for everybody that is rocking with us. So I appreciate you guys. That's all I could say. So thank you guys for rocking with us, and thank you for putting up with the shitty audio. I hope that the information makes up for the audio quality being a little bit subpar for what our usual expectations are. So I appreciate you guys. And in any case, we're looking at the next fight. He goes out there and he gets a really quality win. So this is the thing about Fluffy, is the consistency is sometimes not there, right? He went out there and he loses to Marcus Maluco Perez, and you say, you know what, tough luck, tough run of it, but a guy who'd never been submitted, a guy who, it's difficult to get the better of him in the grappling, so to speak. So, you know what, maybe we write that one off as a pass. Then he goes out there and he not only defeats, right, but he's able to submit the great Jin Young Park. And if you look at Jin Young Park, he has been submitted just twice in his career. The only other man to defeat him via submission is fighting for the welterweight title, Shavkat Rakhmonov. So we want to give a lot of credit and respect. Fluffy Hernandez is a very talented ground player. And what else do we know about Jin Young Park? He's offensive on the ground. 6 wins via submission, including 3 of them in the UFC. So he's a guy that knows how to get after it, knows how to put people away on the mat, only been submitted 1 time in the UFC, and who gets the credit? Nobody else but our hero, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. So I think both these guys are super impressive on offense, right? Anthony Fluffy Hernandez with the submission game, with his ability to get on top of opponents, beat them up on the mat, put them in danger, put them through the spin cycle. I think he's got an ability to go out there and stop this fight via TKO if the fight gets extended, if he's able to get the top position multiple times. I think the exact same thing is true for Michel Demolidor Pereira. I think he has an ability to go out there and land a knockout blow in the first 2 rounds with his body shots, with his ability to get after somebody, with knees, with jumping shots, with kicks, with a lot of craziness, stuff that's hard to plan for. I think he's very live in those exchanges. And what have we seen? He's extremely opportunistic. If he hurts you, he's going to try and grab a hold of your neck. And we've seen Marcus Maluco Perez, of all people, make that work. Was it a long time ago? Yes. But do we know that that's the exact kind of game plan that this guy, Michel Demolidor Pereira, is more than happy to go out there and implement? Yes, we do. He's done it twice in a row. And I just think that we'd be crazy to rule out the possibility that in the early rounds, when both these guys are dry, when he goes out there and tries to land really hard shots on this guy, what is the natural reaction of a wrestler or grappler when they start to get hurt on the feet, if they get busted up? They're going to take a shot. And oftentimes, it's a suboptimal shot, right? The shot that you plan, the shot that you want, is not the shot that you take when you get hurt. The shot you take when you get hurt is the one that's, I'm trying to grab onto you from far away. I'm trying to shoot from halfway across the octagon. I'm putting my head and my neck in a compromised position. And like I said, that front headlock gives and takes, guys. It's such a powerful position that if you shoot from too far away, if you're too desperate to grapple at any time, the person that wants to grapple too much is always putting themselves at a little bit of a risk, at a little bit of a liability. They're dipping their head. They're trying to get the fight low, and it does put them in a little bit of a dangerous situation. So I think people have to be a little bit cognizant of that. And, that's the way that I look at this, right? Let's go again through the record of our guy, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. We talked about the inconsistency. He goes lose to Marcus Maluco Perez, right? Then he defeats Jin Young Park, Anaconda choke round 2, win and loss dichotomy. It was very interesting. Then he goes out there against Kevin Holland, and this is what I'm talking about with the body shots, with the knees. Kevin Holland, a guy who has really had mixed results ever since, right? He's had the highest highs, he's had the lowest lows. And Kevin Holland went out there and absolutely delivered him. Round 1, ground and pound after knees to the body. He hurt him really bad, and he was able to finish the fight. And by the way, if Kevin wanted to hop on and get that rear naked choke after he hurt him real bad to the body, I don't know that anything would have stopped him, frankly. So for me, very interesting stuff. Then you look at Rodolfo Vieira, like an all-time great win. I think he was 30-1 to win the fight via submission, guys. And he went out there and showed to everybody that, credentials aren't everything, right? If you get somebody really tired, if you hurt them really bad, it doesn't matter how quality their grappling is. They can get submitted like anybody else. We're all human beings. And if you put somebody in a really dicey situation, you take their oxygen away, you make them start answering hard questions about themselves while they're already hurt, while they're already tired. That's how you make people quit, right? If you want to try and submit people with a lot of techniques and fancy holds and maneuvers, you could do that. But then you're typically going to gas out in 3.5 minutes, and it's going to be tough sledding if you don't get the sub early. And I think the better way is to try and break people down over time, make them gas, make them quit, make them second guess themselves, and then put them away. And I think that, that's the Fluffy Hernandez special. And he went out there against a guy who's really good at jiu-jitsu, and he survived a lot of really hellacious positions, and he got put in bad spots, and eventually he showed that he's got grit, he's got toughness, he's got an ability to work through bad positions, and he could do damage when he's in these grappling situations. He hurt Rodolfo, he made him tired, he made him second guess his life decisions to become a fighter, and he made him break and quit. And it was a really, really impressive win and performance for Fluffy Hernandez. I thought that John Anik said the F word live on the air because he said Fluffy Hernandez so fast that I thought he said Anthony fucking Hernandez. And I thought it was the greatest call I'd ever heard. I was like, only in cage fighting is it acceptable to yell the F word on the air. And I'm perfectly in support of it. And it was just that moment. If he had said it, I would have still supported it. So the FCC can kiss our ass. It's just that great of a moment when you submit an ADCC level competitor like Adolfo Vieira. It's just something different. So then you see Fluffy Hernandez go out there, and he wasn't able to put away Josh Fremd. And that's where you start to scratch your chin and go, that's a little bit weird, right? You'd expect him to definitely put away a guy like Josh Fremd, but he had a bunch of canceled bouts. He had a bunch of rescheduled bouts. So maybe you just chalk that up to inactivity. 2021 to 2022, he didn't have any fights over a year. So I think that maybe that's the way we explain that. Then you look at, Marc-Andre Barriault, fine win, but it doesn't blow your hair back. Edmund Shabazian, that is literally the tailor-made matchup for Fluffy, is it not? Like a guy who's going to gas out in rounds 2 and 3 no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter what pace you push against a guy like this. Like that's just... Honestly, that was like the disrespect of all time to Edmund. They were like, dude, you're not a prospect anymore. You're about to get smashed by Fluffy. So I guess, Edmund could have went out there and finished him in the first round too. But when you look at it, he's just not built to go the long distance, right? Then you look at Roman Kopylov, and that's a solid win. But again, it's a kind of win where, Roman Kopylov, he's had a very hit and miss UFC career. Anybody that's been submitted by Karl Roberson, you got to look at with a little bit of skeptical hippo eyes. And he did get absolutely dominated in the wrestling in the early going by Albert Duraev. And then, he's D'ing up some takedowns. Duraev, I think he grabbed the fence, so the referee put him down. He kind of got a little lucky there. But if you look, Kopylov is a guy that does damage in his fights. He's a powerful enough guy. But I do think the way to beat him is the wrestling and the grappling. That's why he was able to outwork a guy like Cesar Almeida, a guy who maybe doesn't have that same wrestling and grappling pedigree. He was able to beat up Josh Fremd, Claudio Ribeiro, even Punahele Soriano. I think that's his best win in the UFC. But then you look at maybe the Cesar Almeida win. I think those are both good. Alessio Di Chirico is a fine win. But again, the Karl Roberson, Duraev, and Fluffy losses all kind of told you where his ceiling was at. All kind of told you that his wrestling and grappling maybe wasn't up to snuff. And meanwhile, on the Michel Demolidor Pereira side, if you just look, again, one submission loss in a very lengthy career, guys. He's had like 50 pro fights almost. And let me see if I could find where that submission loss was. I'm going to have to go to ShareDog for this. I don't think I could even see it on Tapology. That's the one really good thing. If you're ever looking for fights and you can't find the method of victory, ShareDog is normally a little bit better than Tapology about that. So let me see if I can find his loss via submission. How long ago that was. Yeah, he got submitted via armbar in May of 2014. So this guy, Michel Demolidor Pereira, has not been submitted in 10 years. It could happen again based on pace in this fight. But I don't think he's a complete fish grappler, and I do think he's a big man. I think he's a hard guy to muscle to the ground, I would assume. So for me, my questions in tape study are the following. The most recent examples, what is Michel Pereira's cardio looking like deep in the fight? Then I want to know, is he attacking the body right off the rip? I think that he probably is going to. I want to make sure that that's exactly how he's going to approach it. And then I want to look and see, exactly what are the discrepancies on some of the ends by markets compared to each guy via each method. I think that both guys are live to win the fight by either finish prop. I do think it's more likely than not that this fight ends inside the distance, but you're seeing a goes the distance in a UFC main event at plus 4XX, and these UFC main events have been going the distance at an insane rate. I think that Fluffy fights in such a way that it's very hard to imagine him going the distance, but sometimes over these 5-round fights, guys are a little bit more conservative, and I will just say, again, Michel Demolidor Pereira, his cardio feels like something that could be a real problem down the stretch based on what we know, but also he's found a way to win the vast majority of decisions he's been a part of in the UFC. So you just have to be a little bit cognizant of, are we a little biased here? Could he have an overperformance to our expectations? And I think that when you look at a guy who hasn't been an underdog throughout his whole UFC career, that's certainly something you want to keep in the back of your mind. The other thing I want to note here, guys, if you have never checked it out before, every week on Patreon and on for channel members, and this week I did post this just for the community. I posted this as a community post if you guys want to check this out, the social media A-side report. But I'm going to show this on the screen for just 1 second. And you'll notice something. Michel Demolidor Pereira, huge social media A-side in this main event. 871,000 followers on Instagram compared to just 38.4 thousand on the Fluffy Hernandez side. Now, you could look at that two ways, right? First and foremost, you could say, are they trying to build a star out of Fluffy by having him smash a star in Pereira, right? They've done that many a time. They set somebody up to go take somebody's shine, take their thunder. But on the other side, you say to yourself, maybe they're saying, hey, this guy Fluffy, as talented as he is, as good as he is, if you can go out there and hit him to the body early, you could take him out of there, you could take his shine, you get a main event win, and then he's one fight away from a title fight, and he's got a big following, and he's a fun guy, brings an exciting style, a lot of first-round finishes, and, you know, maybe he goes out there and gets killed. But if he goes out there and gets killed in entertaining fashion by a top contender, whether that's Fluffy or another top contender, I think the UFC's happy with that outcome as well, right? They build him up at 3-0 to go out there and get smashed by somebody else and right off into the sunset. So I think you can make a credible case for both guys. ABC is saying always bet on cardio. I get if you want to say it's minus 120 to the Fluffy side and plus 100 even money on the Michel Demolidor Pereira side, but I would just caution anybody to go lace like a huge chalk price against Fluffy. I would rather wait and see the first round, honestly. And maybe that's a square opinion, right? Maybe he just goes out there and routs him in round one. Fluffy's an impressive guy, right? I wouldn't put it past him. But the way I've seen Michel Demolidor Pereira, I think Fluffy's going to be respectful and cognizant of him early, coming out there with that power, with those knees, with those kicks. He's very flashy. He's very dynamic. I think he's going to try and circle. I think he's going to try and wrap him up, put him against the fence. You got to remember, we are in the UFC Apex Center. A little bit of a smaller cage could present some opportunities to push him back along the fence line. So for me, those are the interesting notes on this fight. But we have, excuse me, excuse me, we have spoken plenty about the main event, especially me. So what I want to do real quick, guys, is I want to circle back with the sharpest chat in the game, and then we will move on to the co-main event of the evening. So let's see what the chat has to say. Tron says, always bet on Peds. I think that's a good modus operandi. Our guy Anthony says, Pereira, mythical fighter at 185. That's pretty smart. The UFC didn't punish Pereira for missing weight with unfavorable matchups, like they have with other guys, says Greenbelt Warrior. I think that's a good point, and I tend to agree with you. I think it's because they were pissed more so at Wonderboy for not taking the fight, honestly. And look who's gotten match made harder after that fight. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Fourth Density says, all the Charles Johnson hype is scaring me. Whenever it's so one-sided like this, it's at least going to be a nail-biter and competitive. I understand what you mean. We'll talk about that fight. Tron says, feels like a fight that gets overturned later. Very possible with the sauce. Pereira sub plus, 2,800. I think that's an interesting look. Pereira sub is as high as 10 to 1, 10.5 to 1. I think that's interesting. Shabazian had him in danger with the guillotine. Hernandez had to drop to his back. Yeah, the flat back to avoid the guillotine. You know that. Bo Jackson says, do your thing, Liam. I appreciate you. Wu says, nah, I'm good just for new people entering. I appreciate that as well. Converse says, Austen Lane, round one for the boys. I don't know if I'll get there this time, but we'll have to see. That's the pillow fight champion of the world. Absolutely respect. Big Chankala says, blast them speakers, y'all. We appreciate that for sure. We make do and we make money. God bless you for it. I appreciate that. General Joy de Beverly. Joshua Frick says, Liam, you sound fine. Thank you so much, Joshua. I'm glad. And people are saying they can hear me. I appreciate that. Thank you to everybody who contributed in terms of your commentary. Sounds fine to me, says Bisping. Positives. Can we get away with stuff since he can't land a backflip to the face? The backflip to the face has been really plus EV for him so far. I don't think he's going to stop. Henry says, no guest. What's going on? We're just doing the first look today. Lord willing, we will have a bets and banter for you tomorrow. My goal is to be live for a bunch of fights this weekend. We got PFL going on. We've got UFC action going on. So my goal is to be live for a lot of fights this weekend, talking the fights, having a great time with everybody, and also to try and get out a bets and banter episode tomorrow night as well. So hopefully we're going to have a big backloaded week of content this week. I had a lot of Contender Series work to do up until Tuesday this week. It's been 10 relentless weeks of Contender Series, guys, but now I feel a lot better about the UFC schedule coming up, where we have a lot more time to dig into each matchup, and we don't have an extra 5 fights each week. So as much as I love Contender Series and as much fun as we've had breaking down the Contender Series, we do now get to focus a little bit more on all the broader slate of action that's coming up on the UFC from a week-to-week basis. So we always love to see that. I appreciate everybody rocking with us in the chat. And now you guys know my thoughts on the main event, which are very simple and straightforward in terms of how we recap this, which is I think that Michel Pereira is a live underdog. I think his best chance to win the fight is to finish Fluffy in the first 2 rounds. I think Fluffy is the kind of guy that once he gets his pace and his rhythm going, he becomes very difficult to deal with. I think in rounds 2, 3, and 4, those are the most optimal rounds for Fluffy. I think that if the fight goes 5 rounds, we're probably looking at a very competitive fight. I think it'll probably be a fight that Michel Pereira maybe has some success early, keeping Fluffy off of him. Maybe Fluffy's able to get the pace going late, get on top of him, put him in some danger, not able to close the show on him. If that's the case, I think it could come down to a very close decision. The fight goes the distance. It's like plus 425. So for me, the ways I'd look to invest are kind of contrarian takes on the method markets. At least that was my initial impression. And I'll leave it there, right? I've already shared some of those thoughts on Patreon. I will definitely post an idea board once it has matured fully on all platforms. But right now I'm still in the work in progress phase. A lot of books still haven't come to market on these props. They're getting later and later on these UFC props at most major domestics. So I'd like to see them put them out a little bit earlier. It gives us a better opportunity to compare the market. But overall, we're going to keep it pushing and see if we can find a lot of opportunities between now and then. My ultimate lean here would be towards the under. But again, it's a fight where if it starts to go over, then it might end up going the distance. Big Chocolate is trying to give me different ideas here on how to make it work with Amazon. Yeah, God bless you, my man. We'll figure something out. We'll get a new mic situation going, and that's that. Make sure that we have a good situation. Somebody was asking me an early prediction for the Francis fight. You know what? Out of respect for the PFL, because this is supposed to be a big show for them, despite their lack of marketing and lack of promotion, we're going to take a very brief aside, and we'll talk about this main event for just a second, and we'll just put this on the screen so you guys have a good idea. If you guys haven't been watching the PFL, I don't blame you. They don't promote their events very well. They've got a great roster of fighters that they acquired from Bellator. You'd hardly know about it. I think Gegard Mousasi is suing them for not, booking him or having anything for him to do, even though they have him hired for work. So I'd like to see the PFL do better. I'd like to see there be competition in the mixed martial arts scene. I wouldn't like to just cover the UFC, but my problem is, when I try and make content about these other leagues and things like that, nobody cares, or at least they didn't in the past, and it kind of, drove me away from making that kind of content, right? I always want to go where the people care about the work, and in that case, I feel like most people care about the UFC. They care about the Dana White Contender Series when it comes around, but this is a PFL fight where you've got the lineal heavyweight champion of the world in Francis Ngannou, a guy who won the belt, left the UFC on top. I do love that for Francis. I will say this as well. If you look back Francis Ngannou, a lot of people said bet him plus 160 via KO against Ciryl Gane. I was like, take him plus 130 on the money line. He's probably going to knock him out, but it's MMA. Crazy shit happens. And he goes out there with a bum knee and wins a crazy decision. And hey, God bless him for it, man. It was a really impressive showing from Francis that time. And could he go out there and get another win? Absolutely, right? He's a big man. He's a scary guy. 38 years of age. He still probably hits like an absolute truck. But let's talk about where he's at coming into this fight. I mean, first and foremost, you're talking about a 75% implied favorite on a guy who's coming off of, pretty brutal knockout loss in boxing against Anthony Joshua. And that was earlier this year, right? It's not ancient history. It's pretty recent, right? If we go ahead and look at the result, March 8th of this year, he gets absolutely flattened, knocked out brutally. And again, I'm not trying to make light of that in any way. I'm just acknowledging a fact, right? Then you look at the boxing fight that he has against Tyson Fury. He comported himself great there, but it's been since 2022 since he's had a mixed martial arts contest. And if you guys remember, that fight against Ciryl Gane, despite being an impressive win in terms of, hey, I went out there and I got the win. I overcame adversity. I did what I had to do. It was kind of just Ciryl Gane being a bonehead. They rushed him along. And my whole premise for the Ciryl Gane bet, guys, was that Francis, I'm talking about, was in the position that Stipe was in the first time that he fought Francis, okay? The company wanted to stick it to their champion. They're like, we have this younger, fresher guy that we could go out there and shine up by having him come kick your ass, and we're going to do just that. So they sign up Francis Ngannou, Stipe Miocic won. And in that fight, I picked Stipe Miocic, and the reason being, they fast-track Francis, they bring him up too early, he's never had a real deep fight, he's never been pushed, and Stipe Miocic isn't a quitter, right? We've seen him get battered all the way around the octagon for 5 rounds by JDS and never look for a way out. So I was like, this guy Stipe is going to stay in the pocket, and if he doesn't die, he's going to move his head, he's going to try and take him down, and he's going to at least show us what this guy is made of. And he went out there and he beat Francis. And then when he fought Francis in the rematch, everybody, or at least I felt like a lot of people were like, man, Stipe's got him. He just has his number. And I was like, are you guys kidding me? Like, this guy now has seen him. He's had some experience in the UFC. He feels a little bit more comfortable and confident now. And if he can D up these takedowns, it's going to be a really sad situation for our guy Stipe. And age, timing is everything in mixed martial arts, right? There's these little details that change over time. And so you saw a completely different Francis Ngannou. After that Jairzinho Rosen strike, no respect, chin up in the air, chased him down, knockout. He was like, I'm going to find a way to beat up Stipe Miocic. He beat up takedowns. He almost got his own takedowns. He beat up Stipe. He landed hard shots, and he put him down. It was really impressive showing by Francis. But that was in 2021, March of 2021. He had problems with his knee. And then he had the fight with Ciryl Gane. And I just don't know if we're going to see the same guy when he comes back to mixed martial arts, right? Like, first of all, it's been a while since he's been back. And I think that activity is very important in mixed martial arts. When you're out of the cage and you come back, it's not the same thing to be in the ring, right? And some guys make it work. Clay Collard and these guys, they come back and forth. Conor McGregor didn't really work out great for him. A lot of these guys, it's very tough to go back and forth. It's a different sport. It's a different environment. It's a different angle. It's a different footwork. And I just think that a guy like Francis, his goal and his dream, he said it. It was never to be an MMA champion. It was to be a boxing champion. He went out there. He had his fights. Maybe if he goes out there and gets a win here, he can get some rally back for another fight. But is there really like a big motivation here? Like, I don't know exactly what his motivation would be except money, fulfilling his obligation, being a man of his word. He said, hey, I will go do the boxing fights and then I'll fight for your organization. Maybe he's just honoring his word and, he doesn't plan on sticking around long-term in mixed martial arts. And honestly, I wouldn't blame him, right? He made a lot of money. He did his thing over in boxing. And if he wants to continue doing it, he can. So be it. But I just don't know that I could trust a guy who's 38, who's been to the mountaintop in an organization that's not the premier organization. Does he give a shit as much as he did about the UFC championship? And maybe he wants to defend that lineal belt and ride off into the sunset. I think that's very possible. I think he's a smart guy, calculated, cares about his legacy. But at the end of the day, I don't know how much this fight, win or lose, affects his legacy. I think people will credit him as the guy who walked away with the UFC belt. I think they'll credit him as the guy who beat Ciryl Gane, when the company tried to stick it to him on the way out the door. and, give him his younger teammate and, have him go against a guy that knew his game intricately, and he still found a way to get the win and stick it to the bosses and shove it up everybody's ass as he walked out the door. So I've always taken my hat off to Francis. I got nothing but respect for the guy. But for me, no pro MMA win since 2022, and you're a minus 300 favorite. No. It's a dogger pass for me on that premise alone. Now let's talk about Renan Ferreira. Is he a guy that I'm fired up about? I think the world of? Maybe not. But he's 1-0 career to the decision, guys. 1 knockout loss, 1 submission loss, 1 disqualification loss. And he got knocked out by Ante Delija. I think that is not a great look. But if you look back, it was ground and pound. Ante Delija, a guy who's the same age as him, right? A guy that I think probably presents a little bit of a different style than a guy like Francis Ngannou. If we look back here, he had the no contest with Rizvan Kunayev and a no contest with Klidson Abreu. I'm guessing my man popped for all the steroids. Kunayev tested positive for anabolics, and Klidson Abreu fight. Klidson failed the drug test. Man, so our guy Renan Ferreira has been on the wrong side of all these drug tests. These guys are going the wrong way, and then oh, wow, that's so funny. And then he knocked out Fabricio Verdum, but the video replay showed that he submitted in a triangle. So this guy's had a very weird career. He's had a bunch of no contests. So I'm going to have to go and watch these fights and get a better feel for his actual record. He got submitted by Vinicius Moreira back in the day via armbar, which is not a supremely bullish sign, but at least Moreira made it to the UFC. He wasn't very good, but that was all the way back in 2016. You give him a pass there. He got disqualified for illegal punches to the back of the head in the LFA in 2019, so maybe there's a little bit of a fight IQ issue on this side. And then the fight where he lost to Ante Delija, that was in 2022. But here's the thing, guys. Since that Francis Ngannou fight in 2022, this guy's competed against Ante Delija, Rizvan Kunayev, Matheus Scheffel, Maurice Green, Denis Galatzov, and Ryan Bader. He's just been having a lot of competitions. He's been going out there and getting wins. He's been staying supremely active, and this would be his second fight this year. He's defeated a couple guys already that are more experienced than he is in professional mixed martial arts. He's got a 7-1 and 3 no contest record in the PFL. So in the PFL, this guy's been holding it down. He's been doing a good job, and I think that, oh wow, he gave that little half tap and knocked him out. Yeah, that's a brutal move by him there. But hey, if you're not cheating, you're not trying in the game of mixed martial arts. That's one thing we've learned over time. So for me, like, if you wanted to make a pure pick on this fight and you said, yeah, I'm picking Francis Ngannou, he's the bigger hitter, he's the way better, he's the guy I believe in more, better pedigree, I'd say all those things are fair. But if you're trying to say, like, there's value in betting him at minus 300, I would be very surprised. I just don't know if I see that. I don't think that he's a great wrestler. I think he's an okay wrestler. I think that he's a solid striker. I think his power is his biggest attribute. I wonder where his speed and explosivity is at with his knees and his power at this point. But if you're dropping Tyson Fury, you could absolutely drop a guy like Renan Ferreira. So it should be a fun fight. It should be a competitive fight. But the last thing I'll mention here, guys, look at the height and the reach here. 6'8" compared to 6'4", 85-inch reach compared to 83-inch reach. The much younger fighter, so all the anthropomorphic advantages are on the side of the big underdog here, Renan Ferreira. So we don't talk a lot of PFL on this show, but I thought this was a big enough fight that it was worth discussing. So if you guys want, hit me up in the chat and say, if you guys are interested in more PFL conversation. If I get enough comments, if I get enough people lighting up the chat, asking about PFL, then we will definitely dig into that card either at the end of the stream or on another separate stream. We'll find a way to cover you guys on those fights. And I'll always acknowledge, I am not proven profitable on PFL or on Bellator. I am proven profitable, in my humble opinion, on Contender Series, on UFC, over a long sample size. But I always just want to be fully transparent. I'll give you my opinions. I'll tell you what I think. But I have a betting track record for a long time on the UFC, and I have a much smaller sample size, and it's been not very positive, honestly, on PFL and those things. That's why I don't really focus on it as my primary betting endeavor either. When you look, I feel like my edge is bigger on the UFC. I feel like I have a better understanding of those fighters, but a lot of people do ask me for my opinions, and with the influx of Bellator fighters, there are some Bellator fighters that I feel I have a decent read on. But in any case, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. What I know a lot of you guys are expecting is more UFC talk, so let's get into it right now. We got the co-main event of the evening, guys. We got Rob Font taking on Kyler Phillips, and one interesting piece of color here. A lot of people talk about the New England cartel. Let's talk about Faraz Sahabi. Let's talk about TriStar MMA, because Rob Font did his camp at TriStar MMA in Canada, right? I heard an interview with my guy Ayman Zahabi. If you guys have been watching the show for a long time, you guys know that my boy Ayman Zahabi has cashed before for us as a plus 600 underdog. And we have nothing but love and respect for Ayman Zahabi on this show. Also got him as a plus 200 dog against Tercios in a fight that did not turn out to be a great fight, but he did go out there and get the win. So we're rooting for Ayman in his upcoming fight at UFC Edmonton. But he got some great work in, he said, with Rob Font in the lead up, right? So he's been working with Rob Font in camp. Rob Font wanted a new look, wanted to switch things up. I think it's probably a smart idea for Rob Font to at least try something different at this point in his career. Here's the red flags on the Rob Font side. He's 37 years of age, guys. And when you just look, bantamweight is not a very forgiving weight class for older fighters. Just long term, they don't tend to bear out the best results. So I'm not trying to hate on a guy like Rob Font. We wish him the best. But it is hard for guys to reinvent themselves at this age in this weight class. And one thing that we want to note as well, a guy like Rob Font and a guy like Kyler Phillips, they have very similar metrics when it comes to the striking stats, okay? If you look, the reach is going to go 1 inch to the Kyler Phillips side. The height is going to be at parity at 5'8". I think that if anything, Rob Font will be slightly taller just based on the eyeball test. Then if you look, the defense is a higher percentage for Kyler Phillips, and that is the biggest difference between the two guys. So the guy who's slightly more efficient is Kyler Phillips. He throws a little bit more, he lands a little bit more, and he's absorbing a little bit less. So he's doing a little bit better job being an efficient striker. You could argue that's because he's fought a lower quality of competition, and I think that's some fair play. But if you look, his striking accuracy is only 45%, and he's still landing 5.72 significant strikes per minute. That's fantastic in the UFC, and it's attributable to his 72-inch reach and his ability to land kicks from a very far distance. So here's the thing that I think stands out the most about these two guys. Kyler Phillips, knocked down against James Gray on Contender Series, knocked down against Hadley and Paiva, knocked down against Tandy Barcelos. He's never been knocked down in the UFC. So he's gone out there, and he's had a pretty solid resume in the UFC. If you look, he has produced a 6-1 record so far in the promotion, okay? Right now, Kyler Phillips is riding the strength of a 3-fight winning streak into this contest, all right? And he's never been knocked down in the UFC. Then you look at this. On the other side, Rob Font, he had a knockdown against Adrian Yanez. He was knocked down 3 times against Marlon Vera. He was knocked down twice against Jose Aldo. He recorded a knockdown in his favor against Marlon Moraes. He recorded 2 knockdowns against Thomas Almeida. He recorded a knockdown against Matt Schnell. He recorded a knockdown against Joey Gomez, and he recorded a knockdown against George Roop. So he's recorded plenty of knockdowns in his UFC career, but what has happened to him recently? In his last 5 fights, he's been knocked down 5 times. Now you could just say, hey, that was Chito Vera, that was Jose Aldo. Those are, longer fights, but he got his ass whooped in both of those fights really, really badly. And, he took a ton of damage there. Other referees, I think, may have jumped in. He's a tough guy. He doesn't look for a way out. Like, he looks for a way back in. He keeps trying to get back up after he gets knocked down. But eventually, that's not going to work anymore. I think that it's impressive that he didn't get submitted against Davison Figueiredo, despite being controlled pretty easily, pretty, fundamentally by a guy like Davison. Then you look at the Corey Sandhagen fight. I had Corey Sandhagen via submission and the sub 5 at 90-1, and he had him locked in a darts choke, and because his shoulder was injured, he couldn't finish it. I wanted to puke in my hands. But in any case, you saw that Corey Sandhagen audited him in the grappling for sure and showed that he's got a lot of holes and a lot of deficiencies there. So maybe this camp at TriStar will help him. Faraz is good at jiu-jitsu. Amin is excellent at jiu-jitsu as well. But is it going to be enough in one training camp? I'm really not sure about that. So for me, I definitely have some skepticism. I think the money line side is Rob Font at this point. The money line has absolutely blown out on the Kyler Phillips side. And I do think we've seen Kyler Phillips have some gas out performances, have some questionable performances down the stretch. But if you just look at his body of work, where he's at in his career, his age, I think he's going to be too fast, too dynamic. And I honestly think that he's live to finish this fight. And the reason I say that is because Rob Font can be hurt. We know that. He can be taken down. And I think Kyler Phillips has very solid jiu-jitsu. I also believe that he has, decent enough power on the feet, and he's got an ability to mix in those spin kicks and shots that you don't really see coming. So for me, an opportunistic club and sub or a knockout is something I would not rule out on the Kyler Phillips side. I would also note that I think Rob Font's best chance to win this fight is either to eke out a close decision or to knock out Kyler Phillips, because I do think Kyler Phillips is a guy that can slow down a little bit at times over the course of his fights, and Rob Font's been in there for 5 rounds. He's been in there for long scraps, and he does have power. I noted how many knockdowns he's recorded in the UFC, so a lot of people don't give him credit as a power puncher, but the stats say otherwise, and he also throws at a huge volume, so he's going to try and give himself a chance in a longer fight. And for me, Kyler Phillips' best attribute is he normally can punch people and kick people out of the fight. But I think that Rob Font almost doesn't know any better, right? Like, for his own good, he comes forward, swings, tries to take a lot of chances, tries to fire that jab, and I think that's his best weapon. So I think he's going to try and put himself in range, and he might get hurt because of it. I think Kyler would be smart to go to the body. Rob has a long body as well. I think that's a target area that you want to try and take advantage of if you're a little bit, like if you're able to spin and kick like a guy like Kyler. I think those are opportunities that will be presenting themselves against a guy like Rob Font. So ultimately, guys, we note here Rob Font, the social media A-side underdog in this one. He's got 59.7 thousand, but on the other side of things, you want to note this isn't like the main event. This is not age parity. Rob Font's already had his whole UFC career. Kyler Phillips still just developing, right? Still developing into a UFC product. 6-1 right now in the promotion. Very good record, very marketable. Also off the Contender Series product. Meanwhile, Rob Font, 10-7 in the promotion, right? Starting to round out towards the end of his career. If you look at his recent results, just one win in his last 4 contests, and it was against Adrian Yanez, a guy who's very talented, but basically is a one-note boxer that can't take a low kick very well and can be hurt on the feet. So I think that Adrian has a lot of bright potential, but he can be out-wrestled, he can be outmaneuvered, and definitely he could be outsmarted on the feet. So he's got a lot of things he needs to improve on, and Rob Font was able to take him out in a fight where it was super competitive until Rob hurt him. But either way, they kind of just swung recklessly in the pocket. Otherwise, these guys that have fought smart, that have gone for takedowns, they've gotten them. And then when they haven't been going for takedowns, if they've been in extended striking fights, they've been knocking down Rob Font and hurting him. So for me, I think that's something to watch out for here. I tend to look at Zahabi as the Canadian John Kavanagh. He's been a long-time coach of some good fighters, but it's all hit and miss, man. Not everybody's going to be a world champion. Not everybody's going to be the best. If they didn't pay Renan to lose, trust me, he'll beat Ngannou. I think he's exposed. Hey, I'm tending to agree with you, man. I think it's a clear dogger pass situation. It's going to be a staring contest. TriStar game plan, says my guy Moyes. Shout out to you. Fury is big, just like Renan, and Francis was able to touch his chin. I think he can and will put him out. I think that's fair play, Keys. Like, I don't think that's a bad notion, but it is a tough spot, I think, to come back as a -300 favorite when you've been out for a while. And here's the other thing: what fight can they book for Francis after this fight? That's a question I have, right? And it doesn't mean that there's not an answer. Maybe they have something up their sleeve. But what's one fight you could always sell if a dominant fighter loses? The rematch, right? So if Francis goes out there and loses, then I think they can sell PFL Battle of the Giants 2. Can he get it back in the rematch? And I just think that that's a marketable angle. So, again, I always try and think 10 steps ahead, try and think if there's a way that there could be business sense about it. And honestly, I do think PFL is kind of like all chips in on Francis. But then you have to think, 10 steps ahead of that. You're saying, okay, if they're all in on Francis, does that mean they need him to win? Not necessarily. They just need him to be in the promotion. And the other thing you have to ask yourself is Francis more likely to stick around if he wins or loses? If he wins, what's the incentive to stick around? I'm a PFL champ. I'm a UFC champ. I fought in boxing. I think then he'd try and go back and box again, right? If he loses, then he might have to defend his honor and go back out there, do another training camp and beat this guy one time and then retire. So I think for me, there's at least enough wiggle room there that I could see the upset happening in the PFL this weekend. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and talk about the next fight on the card. This one is the people's main event of the evening. I know that y'all are excited for this one, guys. Sumudaerji taking on Charles Johnson, 16-6 against 16-6. The 33-year-old Charles Energy Johnson on the run of his life right now in the UFC against the Tibetan Eagle. Just 28 years of age for Sumudaerji, but he could have his back up against the wall of being cut from the promotion, guys. He's got a 72-inch reach here, a 2-inch reach advantage compared to our guy Charles Johnson, and he is 5 years younger, so he's going to check the boxes for the anthropomorphic advantages, but Charles does have 1 inch of height, 5'9" compared to 5'8", and if you look at the UFC record, more impressive on the Charles Johnson side. We've got 3-3 for Sumudaerji. He got submitted easily by Tim Elliott, a fight that was a non-event, got taken down, easily submitted. Against Matt Schnell, they went back and forth. It was a fight of the year contender, guys. I'm telling you, an absolutely tremendous fight, but we saw that he can be hurt on the feet, he can gas out, and he can get finished on the ground. Once again, we've seen that submission defense be a massive liability throughout his career, and something to note there. Then you look back, Luis Smolka, a guy who was definitely hit and miss in the UFC, had some good performances, but also a guy that struggled at times, right? And I think that we saw in that fight, again, some of the limitations of Sumudaerji. He got choked out in the WLF Wars in 2018 prior to getting to the UFC. So against Abdullah Aliyev, he got choked in the second round. Against Yasuki Uraya, he got armbarred in the first round. The guy has just been a walking liability to the submission from the day he started mixed martial arts in 2016 to the day that he fought Tim Elliott in December 9th of 2023. Now, if you look at the UFC stats here, which we're going to do together in just a second, you will see that Charles Johnson is not some prolific volume takedown artist, right? As a matter of fact, if we look at the record, our guy Charles Johnson is shooting just 0.38 takedowns per 15 minutes, right? A very low amount. He's not getting a lot of takedowns. His accuracy on takedowns is particularly low at just 20%. So perhaps the UFC is thinking to themselves, hey, let's give Sumudaerji a winnable fight, a fight that he could go out there and at least try and compete, right? Because this guy probably won't try and take him down. And if you look, you've got a switch stance fighter against a southpaw fighter. And I always try and look at the record that guys have had against this stance before. If it's a southpaw, especially because orthodox, it doesn't really tell you as much, right? That's a pretty typical, stance matchup. But in this kind of matchup, I look and I want to say that in the past, we've seen Charles Johnson struggle a little bit with southpaw. So let's go ahead and take a look. Charles Johnson, his previous fights, he fought Rafael Estevam, and Rafael Estevam, let's see, is an orthodox fighter. So far 0 for 1. Cody Durden is a southpaw. Okay, so there we go. 1 southpaw. 2 southpaws against against Ode Osborne that he lost to. And then Muhammad Makayev is orthodox. So he's had 2 losses in the UFC to southpaws, 2 losses to orthodox fighters. The orthodox fighters that beat him were both wrestlers and grapplers, right? So I think the wrestlers and grapplers that are orthodox, they had a chance. But if you're striking from orthodox with Charles, you're probably going to have a tough night at the office, right? But meanwhile, if you look back, he's had a bunch of really close fights, right? He won the fight against Zaga Zumagulov via split decision, and he did get outlanded in that contest on significant strikes. The total strikes was about the same. The control time was just slightly in favor of Zalgas. So I do think that was an interesting note to have, right? He also lost a split decision against Ode Osborne, but if you look at that fight, he outlanded Ode Osborne 60 to 127, but he did gas out a little bit in that fight and had a little bit of problems down the stretch. So he landed 23 of 50 significant strikes late in that fight, but round 2 was a struggle for him. He gave up a takedown and a minute of control time to Ode Osbourne, who's not an elite wrestler by any means. So he barely got outstruck in round 1, and then got taken down in round 2. So it was a super nip-tuck decision for Ode Osbourne, but it kind of just showed that when he's fighting suboptimally, when he's fighting too often, he can kind of give you a little bit of a letdown performance at times. Then you look at the fight with Jimmy Flick. He just delivered him in the first round, made that look really easy. So I think we've seen a lot of good performances from Charles Johnson. The win over Jake Hadley, solid, got a knockdown, 70 significant strikes to 48, did a great job there. Kind of outlasted a guy like Jake Hadley, and now we're seeing Hadley compete up at 135. As at Maxim dropped Charles Johnson, hurt him badly, but he wasn't able to keep the pace. He wasn't able to sustain deep into the fight. Then you look at the fight with Joshua Van, and Joshua Van was doing a great job. He was landing some big shots. He got a takedown in that fight, but then you see Charles Johnson storm back on him, and in round 3, found a way to connect. Bang, bang, boom, put him down with the uppercut, and that was all she wrote in that fight. Huge shots. So Charles Johnson getting a little bit more confident and assertive with his striking. His metrics are off the charts, doing a great job in terms of landing and not getting landed on as much. 58% striking defense, 51% accuracy, so well over 100%. If you combine those two, that's a pretty solid striking metric if you just want to have a pretty simple shorthand to consider. And I think of a guy like Charles Johnson as a very good fighter, sound in all positions. He can be clipped on the chin. He's 33 years of age at flyweight. I think that's one thing that you want to keep in the back of your mind. We saw it happen against Azat Maxim. He was able to survive it. I do think that against, what's his name, Matt Schnell, it was remarkable that Sumudaerji didn't finish that fight. Matt Schnell time traveled about 5 times. He kept coming back to us. I don't know how he did that. It was a rare, good chin performance from Matt Schnell. But I could just tell you, I thought Sumudaerji was going to finish that fight, and I thought he was so close to finishing it on 10 occasions. And again, I don't think he's going to finish Charles. I just rate Charles too much. I think Charles is too good everywhere. But could I see a path to a greasy decision for Sumudaerji? I could. Could I see a path to Sumudaerji, catching him on the feet? I guess I could. So for me, I think Charles is live by all methods. I could see him winning a decision here. I think that he's the more likely fighter to finish via submission by a massive amount. I think he's way better on the ground than Sumudaerji. I don't think it's even close, but he tends to not take it to the ground. So if it's a pure striking fight, it'll probably play out a little bit closer. I think Charles could take over and knock him out in rounds 2 and 3. We did see Schnell, kind of start to hurt him and take over a little bit as he gassed out. When he starts to put down the pack, you could pick it up. And for me, I think that Charles Johnson, that's a good way that he could come on in this fight. I think you might look to bet him live after 1 round. I do think he might struggle out the gates in this one because Sumudaerji tends to start hot. He tends to throw a lot of power. But Charles Johnson, he builds into his fights. Round 2 and round 3, he tends to be a real son of a gun to deal with for everybody. So overall, I'm going to have to go with my gut here. I'm picking Charles Johnson, but I'm going to do a little more tape study and watch his fights against Southpaws, see how he deals with the Southpaw double attack, see how he deals with the attacks that Sumudaerji is going to be bringing to the table, and see what Sumudaerji's been working on, see if he's wearing double knee braces in the pictures on Instagram, because I know that was a real concern last time when he came out. Is he healthy? Is he feeling good? If he doesn't look like he's feeling healthy, he's probably going to get caught after this fight if he loses. So for me, I think Sumudaerji, he is on the chopping block. He's got his back up to the wall. 28 years of age, but coming off of 2 straight losses, 3-3 in the promotion. They've got a couple flyweights coming in off the Contender Series. So he's got to make something happen here. Coming off of losses to Matt Schnell, who's, I think, cut from the promotion, and Tim Elliott, who is, it's a fair enough loss. But again, it's the kind of guy that you probably want to be able to beat if you want to take a big step forward in the division. His wins in the division are over Zaruk Adeshev, Malcolm Gordon, and Andrei Sukumtoth. And I don't think any one of those guys is still signed with the promotion. None of those guys are high level. So for me, I think that Sumudaerji, is kind of a gimmicky striker. And unless he wins by knockout, Charles Johnson is just a better guy overall. But again, Southpaw dynamic could be an interesting note here. So I'll revisit that fight with you guys tomorrow when I have clearer thoughts. All right, next up, we've got Jake Hadley taking on Cam Smotherman, and Cam Smotherman is slightly younger here. He's the bigger fighter in terms of height. the reach is about parity in this matchup, and we're going to switch over to Tapology so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And if you look at this matchup on paper, Jake Hadley is the more prepared athlete. Cam Smotherman has to turn around and go from one part of the world to the complete opposite part of the world. If you guys look, I think he was flying out to corner his teammate, and then eventually, he said, hey, you know what, I got to mix up my plans, got an opportunity to fight in the UFC. So the travel could be a problem, something that sets him back here this week. And also, his durability hasn't always been great. I believe he's been submitted as well. So I just had to take a swig of the old water. If you guys are having a sip of your drink, whether it's a coffee like this one, or whether it's a swig of the water, having a beer, whatever you're doing, cheers to you. I appreciate you guys spending this time with me. And we're talking some fights here on the channel tonight. And right now, we're talking Jake Hadley and Cam Smotherman. And in this one, guys, Jake Hadley, we'll talk about his UFC career. He's 3-3 in the promotion. And the matchmakers kind of shanked him out the gate, right? They gave him some really tough matchups when he first got here because he missed weight on Contender Series, and Dana still signed him, right? So they give him Alan Nascimento, a guy with 24 professional fights who's an absolute stud on the ground, very difficult to submit, and he was unable to get the win there, right? So then he goes out against Carlos Candelario, and I don't even think Tyro was able to put Candelario away. If you look back, Carlos Candelario, 2 losses in the UFC, right? And he was finished by Jake Hadley. He was not finished by Tatsuro Taira in Tatsuro's UFC debut. So hats off to Jake Hadley. That was a really impressive win in my view. The Luke Shanks win pre-UFC is a fine win as well. Then you look at the Malcolm Gordon win. Went out there and delivered Malcolm Gordon the way you're supposed to. Hurt him to the body, finished him upstairs, put him down. Shout out to Panda Online Marketing. Says, first time listening and awesome breakdowns, my friend. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you're a new listener like Panda, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, guys. I talk about fights here each and every week. I try and be fair and respectful, talk about both fighters, but I also try and talk about the reality of the situation as I see it. I try and be blunt when it calls for a blunt call, and I try and just level with you guys each and every week on the fights, and I have a profitable track record betting on these fights, but also I try and analyze each and every fight, whether I'm betting it or not, with the same level of intensity for everybody that listens to the show. So thank you guys so much for putting the faith and time into listening to the program. It means the world to me, and whether you tail fade or you're indifferent to my bets and my plays, then I really hope that you get value from the show and the breakdown and the analysis. And in this fight, what I'll note is that the Cody Durden loss, that's aged okay, right? The Charles Johnson loss, that's aged okay. Those are both guys that have gone out there and got a lot of wins. Then what do we see, right? He goes up and he fights at bantamweight. He actually misses weight at bantamweight, which is crazy, right? But I think he took that one on short notice, so we'll give him a little bit of a pass. And when he steps up on short notice to fight Callum Loughran, the Irishman, right? A guy I respect, he went out there and he was able to beat him as a plus 200 underdog, did the damn thing that he was supposed to at UFC 304. That was an impressive win, showed out in that spot. And even though he missed weight, I think he showed, hey, yeah, he put out a real ability there. Cam Smotherman, on the other hand, guys, if we go back and look, his losses, they're just not as quality, right? If you look back, Charlampos Grigoriou, right? Charlampos has really struggled in the UFC, and we've predicted his downfall. Not to be disrespectful either, but we just had a feeling that Charlampos wasn't the real deal. Holyfield, I picked my guy Chad Hellinger against him. So definitely had some skepticism about Charlampos, right? If you look at his wins before that, Peter Caballero, that's a fine win. Adam Martinez, Casey Jones. Casey Jones, again, is a good win, but the other ones, it's a little bit more of the journeyman type records, right? Loses to Shane Torres, no skin off his nose, still an inexperienced guy. Loses to Christian Strong, got knocked out by CJ Jimenez. You look at the regional scene on the amateur circuit, got choked out by Connor Stampley. So now you're just starting to look at a bunch of losses adding up, right? He loses to Connor Stampley via rear naked choke. He loses a split decision to Tony Toro, beats Tony Toro in the rematch. Hey, hats off to you, right? Goes out there and avenges it. CJ Jimenez, he gets knocked out in the first round very quickly. All right, not a great look, but we'll forgive it. Then he loses a decision to Christian Strong, 0-0 fighter. Okay, we'll forgive that. Loses to Shane Torres, 3-1 when he's 4-2. Okay, again, that was in 2022. It was a pretty recent performance. He's had a lot of fights since then, right? Got a couple wins under his belt, but gets instantly knocked out by Charlampos. So now we've got 2 knockout losses they're starting to accumulate, and he's a young guy, so maybe it's all just getting the jitters out and a couple problems, and they're not going to rear their head again. But how much faith can I take from beating a 4-6 Ryan Mandola via third round choke, right? Ryan Mandola is 4-7 as a pro, and he's not a horrible fighter, right? He has a competitive fight with what's his name? With Luis Gurriel that just got signed from Contender Series. He had a competitive fight with him and dropped him. So he's got some power, but it takes him till round 3 to get Ryan Mandola out of there. Ryan Cusey goes to a split decision, right? It could have easily went the other guy's way. I think my guy Jewish Better liked the Ryan Cuse side going into that fight, and Ryan Cuse, I believe, was a big dog there. Then you look at the Mando Gutierrez fight, and Mando Gutierrez, I think, lost to 17-year-old Raul Rosas Jr., got knocked out by Cody Gibson in the first round. I mean, this guy, he's been having all sorts of problems lately in his career. Also got rear naked choked by Mo Miller back in the day. So Mando Gutierrez is good, but he's got a clear ceiling right now. Unless he makes some big improvements, he's just not quite at the level of UFC quality. So I think Jake Hadley has proven himself to be UFC quality. I think Cam Smotherman hasn't proven that yet. So for me, I think the right guy is favored here in Jake Hadley. But the problem I'm having is he really suited for this 135 weight class long term, or is he a blown up flyweight? I think that's still yet to be seen. So for me, this is probably just a clear pass fight. Maybe there's a couple props that will be interesting on the Hadley side. I do think, like I mentioned, we kind of know that Cam Smotherman can be finished at times in his fights, and maybe that's something that he can address, but certainly it's been a problem for him in the past. So ultimately, my lean there is towards Jake Hadley and probably a finish in that fight against a short notice opponent. But Cam Smotherman, welcome to the UFC, stepping up on short notice. That's how you get an opportunity, especially when you lose on Contender Series. So hats off to him. I think he's doing everything right professionally. But a lot of times, guys, when you come in on short notice, it's a sacrificial ass whooping to get that foot in the door. And that might be what he's got in store for him against Jake Hadley. But it should be an interesting fight. Next up, guys, we've got a fight that I'm not going to spend as much time talking about. And the reason being, I don't really have strong thoughts on this fight, right? I'll simplify my thoughts on this fight. You've got Darren Elkins, he's 40 years of age, taking on Daniel the Pit Pineda, who's 39 years of age. So the damage against the Pit, 40 versus 39. These guys are both past their prime. These guys both have double-digit mixed martial arts losses, and it's a pick 'em price. I mean, can I really argue with that? Can I dispute that? Like, a lot of people are going to plant their flag on one side or the other. But for me, I think you can make a credible case that Darren Elkins is washed if you look at his record. His win over TJ Brown. TJ Brown is just not good at brain thinking in the mixed martial arts cage, Outside of it, God bless him. Maybe he's doing a lot better with the thinking department, right? But the fight IQ has really been a struggle for him inside the octagon. Made a lot of really pivotal mistakes that cost him throughout his fights. You look at the Jonathan Pierce fight, he lost a unanimous decision there. He got out-wrestled, out-paced, out-hustled, didn't show his same tenacity and ability quite there. Then you look at the Tristan Connolly fight. I mean, Tristan Connolly, besides the Michel Pereira win, he's kind of been a sacrificial lamb. He didn't have the physicality to compete at the UFC level, all told. You look at the Cub Swanson loss. He gets finished brutally there. And, I mean, I think I bet Cub Swanson knockout plus 300. I mean, Cub is a little bit past his prime, and he just absolutely rendered him, right? Just went out there and showed him what time it was. Derek Minner is, he was like federally investigated for potential fight fixing, right? So we're definitely going to have to make a video about that one day. I certainly have that in my plans. Shout out to Uncle Weezy. Say, how dare you insult TJ Brown's brain thinking? I would never. Not an insult, just an observation, right? Elkins, round 2 sub while losing a third of his blood. That is typically a Darren Elkins win. So I could definitely see that happening. But again, you look at the quality of wins. Garagori, not good. Derek Minner, not good. Tristan Connolly, not good. TJ Brown, not good. Daniel Pineda, I do believe, is better as a fighter than all those guys in terms of skills. The problem for Daniel Pineda is he's not reliable, durable, about that life, right? And here's what I mean by that. He has gone to decision in his last 2 fights. But if you look back, Nathaniel Wood is not a very good UFC level finisher. In fact, he's never finished a fight via knockout or strikes in the UFC. He has 3 stoppages. All of them are via submission. And if you look at Daniel the Pit Pineda, he has been submitted 6 times in his career, but it's not something that a lot of people accomplish easily. I don't think he's been submitted in quite some time. If we go back and look, he was submitted via knee bar by Chas Skelly in 2010, And I think most of his submission losses are before then, right? So this guy's been fighting forever. Daniel Pineda has been down for a long time, with this fighting game. And I do think that he is past it as well. I do think he's taken too much damage as well throughout the course of his career. His win over Tucker Lutz was solid, right? He went out there and got that win. The Caceres loss, if you look at Caceres, he's finished a handful of guys. I think he punted Julian Erosa's head into the third row, if my memory serves there. Let me go ahead and take a look here. Yeah, he absolutely punted Julian Erosa's head into the third row in the first round. And he has 6 UFC stoppages, but 10 wins by decision. So one of those 10 wins was against our guy Pineda. Then if you look at Pineda's other fights, right? He beat Herbert Burns, gassed out Herbert Burns. Herbert Burns might be the one person with way worse gas than Daniel Pineda in the UFC, right? Then you look at the Andre Fili fight. It was trending all the way in the wrong direction before he was able to, find a way out of that contest, right, with the eye pokes. Then you look at the Jeremy Kennedy situation back in the PFL and the Movlid Kabulaev fight. This guy was on all the sauce in the world. So he came off the PFL from all the sauce in the world, and then he's in the UFC. And frankly, I don't think the UFC has done him many favors. I don't think the UFC really wants to see Daniel Pineda do very well. I don't think they hate him. They've given him a couple layup fights. The Tucker Lutz fight was a winnable fight for him. The Herbert Burns fight was clearly a winnable fight for him. But if you look, the Cub Swanson fight, he got absolutely cleaned up in that one, got beat up really bad. Andre Fili looked like he was on his way to whooping his ass. Nathaniel Wood did everything but finish him. And Alex Caceres also was able to just pretty cleanly defeat him. So if you look, he struggled pretty immensely in the UFC, 5-7 overall in the promotion because he did have another run with the company back in the day. But if you just look at this guy, a lot of his wins are early submissions. And we have seen that Darren Elkins can be finished, right? If you look back at his career, he's been submitted 1 time. He's been stopped with strikes 4 times. So he could absolutely get knocked out in the first round here. He could get club and subbed potentially. But the last person to submit him inside the octagon was Charles Oliveira via armbar in 2010. So this guy hasn't been submitted in ages. Both these guys are really talented in terms of their knowledge on the ground. So I would think more often than not, a finish here is ground and pound or a knockout. And I think the knockout would be Daniel Pineda in round 1, or I think the TKO would be Darren Elkins in round 2 or 3, whether that's with the sub or with the TKO. I would lean towards a TKO. Both these guys, if you look at their losses, 4 losses via TKO for Darren Elkins, and for Daniel Pineda, he has just 3 losses via TKO, but his 6 losses via submission, I already mentioned, most of them were way early on in his career. And I don't think he's an easy mark on the ground by any means at this stage of his career. I think the way you'd get him is with exhaustion, with pace. Elkins round 2, Elkins round 3, that kind of angle. So for me, I do think Elkins, despite being 40, probably has the better gas. But the one thing I'm worried about in this fight is that neither guy has the cardio to push after the first round, and they both just hold on to each other and have a disgusting, drunk, 39, 40-year-old fight. And I can't blame them if they do, right? They've earned that right at this stage of their career. But that's why this fight could be a fun banger, could be a crazy scrap. And I think it will be because of Darren Elkins. But you have to just wonder what Daniel Pineda is going to do in this fight. Because I do think, like, skill for skill, he's the better fighter. He just can't fight at a sustainable pace for 15 minutes. And Darren Elkins has a way of pushing through that unless he gets killed. So even in the fight with Cub Swanson where he got beat up really bad, he was not looking for the door. He just was getting hurt and the referee couldn't watch it anymore. And that's kind of the experience watching Darren Elkins these days. You're watching, through your hands. Shout out to Moyes for the Cupid's Lingerie advertisement from our guy, TJ Brown. What a great shout that is. And if you guys have never seen that, TJ Brown, Cupid's Lingerie, fire that up as soon as we're done on this stream. You got another couple minutes of entertainment lined up for you. That'll be a great thing to fall asleep to. But in any case, guys, let's move along to this next fight. We got a flyweight contest. It's Matheus Nicolau taking on Asu Almabayev. And I got to say, guys, Asu Almabayev, he's been hot out the chute, right? 3 wins in the UFC already, 3-0 out the gate, 20-2 as a professional. Very solid record. And if you look back, guys, he lost to Tatsuro Ulanbekov. He looked completely outsized in that fight. Tagiro's a big guy. He's a strong guy. He's a very capable, quality wrestler. So that, I think, was like the really, jarring loss of his career. He kind of got thrown down and he a little bit quit there, right? He kind of just said, hey, I've had enough of this one. But that was Tagir, who was big, strong, physical, and had just a big upper hand on him. Since then, guys, he's gone on a very lengthy win streak. And if you look back, right, if we look at his winning streak so far, he's on a 16-fight win streak right now as a professional, 3-0 in the UFC. So 3-fight win streak in the promotion. And he beat Ode Osbourne via first-round submission, then rattled off 2 unanimous decisions in a row over CJ Vergara and Jose Johnson. Now, Jose Johnson's a BJJ brown belt, I believe. If not, he's done a very good job in terms of his credentials, right? He went out there and submitted a very talented black belt and a guy who's been around for a long time in Chad and Hellinger. And if you look at Chad's record, I know that he's got a lot of submission losses on his record, but if you watch the fights and if you've seen how he's progressed over time, Chad's grappling has grown leaps and bounds from when he was getting submitted on the regional scene way back in the day, and Jose Johnson still showed that ability to catch him on the ground. So I respect Jose Johnson. I think he's a talented guy, and Asu went out there and showed he can go out there and get the better of him. Against CJ Vergara, he did the same thing. Against Ode Osbourne, he went out there and just easily snatched up that neck in the early going. And that told me that this kid was playing for keeps, right? He has an ability to close the show if he's able to get on that back. He went to a split decision with Zach Makovsky on the regional scene. When he's not able to get his wrestling off, it does become a much more difficult fight for him. He's willing to attempt the wrestling at a high rate. How do we know that? He's averaging 6.68 takedowns per 15 minutes. That's a shockingly high amount, right? And if you look back, he got 2 against Ode Osbourne, submitted him in the very first round, got the back, never looked back, just took the rear naked choke victory home with him. Then he got 9 takedowns against CJ Vergara. And if you go back and look, CJ Vergara, he just got cleaned up over the weekend, right? So his stock is at an all-time low. But he had a 60% takedown defense in his career. And the guys that have taken him down are Ode Osbourne 1 time, Clayton Rodriguez 2 times, Tatsuro Taira 3 times, Daniel Lacerda 1 time, and then 9 times for Asu Almabayev. So you see, Asu Almabayev, he's got an ability to go out there and take, a lot of takedown attempts, right? 14 attempts against CJ Vergara, 9 secured, 9 minutes plus of control time. That's an impressive showing, whether you like his style or not. 11 minutes of control time on 6 takedowns, 11 attempted takedowns against Jose Johnson. So against Jose Johnson, once again, he showed off an impeccable takedown offense, ground game. And then you look at his total strikes, 77 total strikes against Jose Johnson over 15 minutes. Against CJ Vergara, he landed 85, right? So 85 total strikes over the course of that fight against CJ Vergara. And then against Ode Osbourne, a fight that he finished in the first round, he landed 26 significant strikes. He landed 4 significant strikes. I'm sorry, I'm now reading Ode Osbourne. I got so confused, I switched pages. Here, I'll show you guys what I'm looking at. Asu Almabayev, 26 of 40 on significant strikes in a first-round fight, 52 of 78 total strikes. So he got after Ode Osbourne, landed a ton of strikes, and attempted 2 submissions before getting the eventual finish. Here's what's an interesting note here, right? If you look at his opponent, Matheus Nicolau, in this fight, this is what makes it a tricky spot. Because Matheus Nicolau, one of his calling cards has been takedown defense throughout his UFC career. Highlighted right here on the top of the screen for you guys is 93% takedown defense. So he's really D'd up a lot of the takedowns that he's faced in the UFC. Let's go ahead, though, and look at the actual takedown attempts. 3 takedown attempts, 3 takedowns for Nicolau against Bruno Correa, none for Correa. Then 3 takedowns for Matheus Nicolau against Smolka, none for Smolka. 2 takedowns for Nicolau against Kopp in a fight where I bet Nicolau plus 105, I think. And Kopp, outlanded him on significant strikes, but Nicolau took the split decision home there. 1-1 on takedowns with Tim Elliott. That's a good look, right? Tim Elliott's definitely a solid wrestler, but he's an unconventional wrestler. He's not a go to the legs wrestler, right? He's an upper body wrestler. Then you look at, Matt Schnell, right? Matt Schnell, he was able to knock out Matt Schnell, but he was able to get the 1 takedown as well. So nobody's taking him down, right? This guy basically doesn't get taken down. The only guy to take him down so far in the UFC was Tim Elliott. So that's a good look. However, there's a couple problems I have with the Matheus Nicolau style. Number 1, 3.62 significant strikes landed per minute. That's fine. But he's absorbing 3.2 on the comeback, right? He's got a good 66% striking defense, 52% accuracy. So his numbers say he should be a very good striker, right? The problem is one knockdown absorbed against Alex Perez, one knockdown absorbed against Brandon Royval, one knockdown absorbed against Dustin Ortiz, one knockdown absorbed against Bruno Correa. He got knocked out in the first round by Pedro Nobre. So this guy has been knocked out 4 times, right? All of his professional losses via knockout. In the Manel Cap fight, he got buzzed badly in that fight, right? So he didn't end up getting finished. But a lot of his fights, guys, he ends up circling around the outside of the cage the entire fight because he's afraid of getting clipped on the chin. He's afraid of engaging, right? You look at this fight. These guys are going to be at virtual size parity, right? I think a little bit taller for Matheus Nicolau, a little bit longer in reach. So Nicolau might have some success going on the outside, operating with his long jab, using his footwork, using his ability to D-up takedowns. That is his path to winning this fight, in my view. Eke out a close decision, plus 320 on the decision, plus 900 or so on the split. I think that's an interesting way to look at the Nicolau side. Because I do think Asu's a tough guy to finish. I think he's a guy that's got pretty good composure. I don't think he's going to get submitted easily. I do think Matheus Nicolau is a pretty solid grappler. If you look at him historically, he's not a very proactive grappler at the UFC level. If we look at Matheus Nicolau, he's averaging 0.8 sub-attempts per 15 minutes. He had 3 sub-attempts against Bruno Correa, 2 sub-attempts against Luis Smolka, 1 sub-attempt against Manel Cap. And if you look back, he did sub Bruno Correa in 2015, but since that fight, he has not submitted any opponent in the UFC. So I do think that's something that we want to keep in the back of our mind, right? Matheus Nicolau, 19-4-1 record, but his finishes haven't been as prolific, right? 5 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 9 wins via decision. And in the UFC, it's been way more heavy on the decisions, right? 5 decision wins, just 2 stoppages. And meanwhile, he's been stopped with strikes 3 times. So for me, I think Asu Almabayev, despite the fact he's not known for being a power puncher, I think he's live to win this fight via knockout because I do not trust the chin of Nicolau. I don't trust the confidence of Nicolau right now at this stage of his career. He's still a young enough guy that maybe he could make some improvements. But guys, he's 31. He's been getting knocked out since he was on the regional scene in 2012. And I don't think his chin is there. I don't think it's trustworthy. Dustin Ortiz is not known for being the most heavy-handed guy. Knocked him out with a head kick in the first round. Brandon Royval, a guy that hurt my boy Tyra. He's got power in his hands. But look at the difference, right? Tyra rallied, recovered, found a way to stay in the fight. This guy got blasted out of there in brutal fashion, guys. It was a hard knockout to watch. Then he goes out there against Alex Perez. He tried to fight less against Perez. He tried to exchange less against Perez. And as soon as Perez tracked him down against the outside using classic pressure, he was able to finish him. Asu Almabayev, for me, is probably going to pressure forward in this fight, looking for takedowns. And if he's able to back this guy up to the fence, if he loads up on something, he can knock him out, even if he's not the most heavy-handed guy. I truly believe that, just because I do not trust the chin of Nicolau to receive these shots. I don't think he's confident receiving the shots right now. So for me, I feel like Asu Almabayev is probably a rightful favorite, but the price is probably a little bit prohibitive. If you look at Matheus Nicolau over time, let's go examine how he's performed as a dog. I would assume he's done a pretty solid job in this underdog capacity. 3-0 as an underdog for Matheus Nicolau, 128% ROI. I'm going to have a full report on the previous performance and odds range for Patreon members and for channel members on YouTube tonight. Information on both of those things is down in the description below if you're interested. However, I did share a little bit of the information before. We could briefly pop over to this. Asu Almabayev is a big A-side, guys. 279,000 followers. And again, this is available for anybody. If you just go to my community page on YouTube, you could find this link right now to the A-side report for this week. And we're talking right now about Asu Almabayev, guys. 279,000, one of the biggest followings on the card, taking on Matheus Nicolau. And one thing that stands out to me as well, Matheus Nicolau has had a ton of fights in the UFC, right? Plenty of time out here in the UFC, many times out. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, and I wish it was different. I like him. I think he's a fun guy. He's got a cool thing when he knocks people out or gets the finish. He does the sword and all this stuff. I like Matheus Nicolau. I think he's fun, but he hasn't translated to the audience. This guy, Asu Almabayev, 3 times up, 3 times down for his opponents, and meanwhile, he's already accrued like a big following, whether it's outside the UFC, whether it's just in his native Kazakhstan. The guy is building up a reputation and a following. He's got the cool hat as well. We know those cool hats in mixed martial arts, very plus EV long term. So I respect Matheus Nicolau, but I vowed that I was probably done betting him after, the fight that he went against Manel Cap, and I bet him, and he got the split decision win. I just didn't think I could trust him anymore. I thought he was too vulnerable to being hurt on the feet. So that's the way I see it, guys. I respect his game, but I don't trust the chin at all. And if I can't trust you to take a punch in a cage fight, it's very, very difficult for me to get behind you. So shout out to everybody rocking with us in the chat. We got JJ talking about Asu being a stud. I agree with him. He says he likes how he flows from wrestling takedowns to judo. I agree as well. He's got a cool style. Londo says, call me crazy, but I have bets on Lane KO and Vidal KO. We'll talk about him. I wouldn't say crazy, but I do think certainly anything could happen there. Respect to everybody who's rocking with us in the chat. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. We got 42 people rocking with us on YouTube. I want to say, if you guys are on YouTube right now, please do me the hugest favor. Go ahead and drop a like on this video. Helps other people find the streams, and also it's a great show of support. I really appreciate it. If you guys are with us on social media, that's fine too. I prefer if you come over to the YouTube side, but no problem. If you're rocking with us on X, do us a favor, hit the retweet button. Let other people know that they can find the stream here as well, because we still got plenty of great fights to talk about, and I appreciate the support. So with that being said, guys, let's move along to the prelim portion of the event, where we've got Brad Katona taking on John Matsumoto. And this is a much more experienced UFC fighter in Brad Katona. But I'll just disclose my biases, guys. I've never been a Brad Katona guy. I don't like his style. I don't like his attitude. I don't like his face. And again, could he beat me up? Yeah, he probably could. Like, this guy, Brad Katona, he's a legit fighter. He's got a great record. He keeps finding ways to win. Trains at SBG Ireland. Like, there's things I should like about the guy, but I'll just level with you guys. When I have a bias, when I don't really rock with somebody, I'll just tell you. And I've never been a Brad Katona fan. I don't like watching the guy fight. I hope to see him lose in terms of the way I watch fights as a fan. But I take my hat off to the guy in terms of his career. He deserves respect. He's very talented. Here's the problem. The win over Cody Gibson, I don't rate it. The win over Jesse Butler, I bet Jesse Butler. Was it a terrible bet? Yes, it was. Was it a terrible bet because of Jesse Butler? Yeah, that's the problem, right? It was Jesse Butler. I tried to fade a guy I think is terrible, or a guy that I don't think is like top level, with a guy who's just not UFC level at all. And Jesse Butler was going to be the bigger guy. He had a couple intangible boxes coming in, but he's just not a real top level guy. He's never going to amount to anything in the UFC. No disrespect. So if that's the case, probably shouldn't be betting him against a two-time Ultimate Fighter winner in Brad Katona. Lesson learned for me there, right? So I got to be a lot more careful. Now you're seeing an underdog price on the Brad Katona side. And I'll just tell you guys, if you're on the Brad Katona side, I think the way you play him personally, and again, this is my personal opinion, you play the decision, you play the Brad Katona split decision at a big plus money number, and I just think that's the way you go about it, right? He's typically a decisionator, right? If you look at his UFC record, he's never finished a fight in this promotion. He's never been finished, right? 4-3 career in the UFC, 3 down, all via decision, right? And if you look, unanimous against Butler, unanimous loss against Armfield, unanimous win against Gibson, split win against Timur Valiev on The Ultimate Fighter. I thought he could have lost that fight, to tell you the truth. He beat Carlos Vera via unanimous decision. And then if you look, he had some solid wins in Brave to get back to the UFC. Again, I do nothing but take my hat off to him for those wins. That was all quality. He went out there and did his job. He even finished a fight against Borislav Nikolic, right, with a nice guillotine choke. But he loses to Hunter Azure. That's a loss that didn't age great. The loss to Marab, obviously, you give him a full pass on that. But then you look at the fact he submitted Bryce Mitchell back in the day. He beat Kyler Phillips via majority decision. This guy has very good wins on his resume. He can beat guys that are like quality MMA fighters. The Timur Valiev win is a great win. John Matsumoto, on the other side, his round winning ability, you could maybe call into question after that last fight with Dan Argueta. It was certainly back and forth. It was certainly very close. You saw some things to be worried about, but John Matsumoto, solid win over Casey Tanner, solid win over Dan Argueta, and before that, he was on a nice win streak as well on his regional scene. You look at this guy, he's riding a 15-fight win streak into this contest. That's a very long one, but back in his amateur days in 2017, he was submitted by Willian Prado. We did see that he could lose some minutes, some exchanges against Dan Argueta. He did get taken down a bit in that fight. If we go look at the UFC stats page, We'll pull that up real quick. This is a bantamweight contest, and we're looking at a Brad Katona who's 5'6" against a John Matsumoto who is 5'6". We're looking at a 68-inch reach for John Matsumoto compared to just 64 for Brad Katona, and we are looking at the much younger fighter in John Matsumoto. So obviously he's got some on-paper advantages. In terms of the strikes landed per minute, it's about the same, right? Very, very similar. 4.7 for Brad Katona compared to 4.8 for John Matsumoto. I'm rounding up to the nearest hundredths just for simplicity. Then if you look at the striking accuracy, way higher on the Brad Katona side by average, and he's over a longer sample size. But you could also note, a small sample size doesn't really tell you much, especially when he was fighting a wrestler who was trying to take him down in Dan Argueta for the most part in John Matsumoto. Then you look at the fight, on the other side, the strikes absorbed. Both of them absorb a very similar amount of strikes per minute, right? Then you look at the defense. Okay, John Matsumoto is slightly better, but again, very small sample size. You don't want to read too much into that. Who's getting more takedowns? That would be Brad Katona. He's not lighting the world on fire with his takedowns. His accuracy is not there, but 1.7 per 15 minutes, not bad. He's not averaging any submission attempts. I think John Matsumoto is the more dangerous submission grappler of the two, personally. I do think that there's a world in which Brad Katona rips a guillotine, but I don't think it's very high percentage, right? I think the more likely outcome in terms of somebody finishing this fight would be John Matsumoto. I think he's probably a little bit more powerful with the punching. I think he's probably a little bit more dangerous with the kicks. I think he's probably a little bit more able to go out there and try and put Brad Katona in a bad situation in the grappling. But frankly, in round 3, do I trust John Matsumoto 100%? No, I have to go back and relook at the tape because he did look to be gassing a little bit against Dan Argueta before he finished him. And I do think that the one selling point for a guy like Brad Katona is that he typically shows up in great shape, ready to empty the clip for the 3 full rounds. And I don't think he could put John Matsumoto away. But if he could win 7 minutes of this fight, they could steal it for him on the judges' scorecards. The guy is a greaser on the judges' scorecards. He finds a way to win close fights. So those are all things I want to note. However, I think that John Matsumoto I rate higher than Garrett Armfield just in terms of overall talent, in terms of general ability. So I think Garrett is like a pretty solid boxer, fought a pretty nip-tuck performance there, sprawl, brawl, keep it upright, punch him in the face. It was a good game plan by him. I think that John Matsumoto can replicate some of that. But for me, it's probably just a little price prohibitive on a guy that I think still has a little bit to prove in John Matsumoto. So I like the Matsumoto side as a lean, but I acknowledge my biases up front. I think it's probably a dog or pass situation at the window. And for me, it's a pass because I'm not betting on Brad Katona ever. He's just not my kind of guy. Let's go, Liam, says Matt. I don't like his face. I typically don't say things like that, but truthfully, I just try and call it the way I see it, right? Brad Katona talks about the Katona verse, and he's kind of got this weird little gimmick that he does. He's just a very interesting guy. I'm sure for some people, he's the coolest guy. For me, he's just not my cup of tea. I wish him nothing but the best. It's all love and respect here, but I just call it the way I see it. He's not my guy, and that's the way it is. So when somebody beats him, they'll be somebody that I'm a fan of moving forward, just because I don't prefer his style, and that's my right as a fan, right? We all have the right to cheer for who we want, boo who we want, and most of the time, I just think analytically, objectively, but I'll always tell you guys if I have a slight bias, and I don't really like that guy. I never have, and when he beat up Jesse Butler by just taking him down and not even finishing the fight, I was like, what a disgusting way to lose a bet. Sit here for 15 minutes watching my bad pick in action. So, again, that's my fault, not his, but I still felt the way I felt, so that is the way it is. We can move along to the next fight, guys. On Tapology here, we got Joselyne Edwards taking on Tamires Vidal. I do think, according to my chat, Londo says Vidal KO is worth considering here at the 8-1 figure. Let's go ahead and pull up some betting numbers that we can refer to. Some betting odds real quick. And see what exactly is on the market for this fight. Because I did send a first draft idea board on Patreon a little bit earlier, but I'm forgetting now what the exact prices were. So if you look, the ends via KO is about plus 420, and Edwards by KO is only plus 700, best available. So I would probably be looking at the Vidal KO 10-1 or the ends KO plus 420 if I like the KO angle in this fight. I think that you look at Tamires Vidal, and truthfully, guys, I don't really trust her game. She has one loss via KO, one loss via submission, one loss via decision. She got body shotted by Melissa Gatto, and I think that's fair play, right? Like, I think Melissa Gatto is tough. Montserrat Rendon, I think she fights like she's underwater, so I can't really credit that loss. I think that's not a good loss on your record, frankly. The Carol Hossa loss, that doesn't age very well, and the reason I say that is because not losing to Carol Hossa is a bad thing. That's fine. But Carol Hossa hardly finishes anybody, right? Especially at the UFC level. We've never seen her get a finish. And for me, Tamires Vidal losing that fight via finish doesn't say great things. And then you look at the Ailin Perez fight, and she was ready for the door, right? She was ready to check out. She was ready to go home. Ailin Perez hit her with an illegal knee and saved her, right? Got her DQ win on her resume. But ultimately, guys, she was getting her ass kicked in that fight. She was getting punked. So Ailin Perez lost on her record there, but win in the streets. And shout out to my guy, Uncle Weezy, says, Tamires is Portuguese for terrible. And that may be true because I do not rate this woman very highly. And I think that Joselyne Edwards is a better fighter. But here's the truth about Joselyne Edwards. She's 4-4 in the UFC. She's never finished a fight so far. Split decision win against Lucy Pudilova and Jiyeon Kim, who are two of the lowest level women in the division. So not great. Then she beat Ramona Pascal via decision. Couldn't finish Ramona Pascal. Excuse me. Who's not very high level, in my view. Then I look at the Jessica Rose Clark fight. Jessica Rose Clark, for me, is extremely exploitable on the ground. So I didn't love that look for Joselyne Edwards either. I think her ground game is certainly a work in progress at best. She lost to Carol Hossa. At least she did not get finished. Went to a decision there. And she got a win over Yenan Wu in her UFC debut. Lost a split decision to Sarah Alpar. I mean, like, those are the kind of things where you say, man, you can't really trust this girl. Losing to Ailin Perez, I say, is fair play, right? And it was a much more competitive fight with Ailin Perez than Tamires Vidal had with her back in the day. The Nora Cornole loss is another one where you say to yourself, man, Nora, she's not a bad fighter by any means, but she's certainly a limited fighter. And so it did show Joselyne Edwards kind of got jobbed on the cards. I know a lot of people didn't love that decision, but ultimately she just left that fight in the hands of the judges. She left it a little too close. I don't think she puts a huge distance between herself and her opponents all the time. But in this fight, I think both women are live to finish, honestly. I just think both of them have huge vulnerabilities. I don't trust either of them if they're in the fire to push through it. So for me, I lean towards Joselyne Edwards. I think she probably finishes here, but Tamires Vidal, if my guy Londo likes the KO, then I'll at least say, she's got a chance here, right? And again, you're getting 10-1 and plus 420 on either of these women to win by knockout. There's some other interesting props out there, some that I mentioned to people already, and I'll just leave it there. But if it is a gross decision, if it's a close decision, you're looking at an underdog in a women's MMA bout to win by decision at plus 3XX. The split is plus 9XX. All just things that I think are worth considering if that's the angle you like. Shout out to my guy, XBL, Brian. Cool guy and always keeping us honest with the picks and everything like that. So I appreciate my guy checking in the chat. Always a pleasure to hear from all you guys. I always say each and every week, we got the sharpest chat in the game. So if you guys weren't able to make it live, not a problem at all. Go ahead and drop your sharp chat. Your sharp commentary in the comments down below. I do read it. I do respond to people. I get back to people in the comments. So I appreciate that feedback. I appreciate the support. It helps in the algorithm. Other people find the show. But also, if you have questions that you want answered, that's a great way to get in touch with me. And I'm happy to deal with any questions that you guys have that way. So with that being said, guys, let's talk about the next fight on the card where Jessica Penne is 41 years of age and she is taking on Elise Reed, 31 years of age. So a 10-year age gap between these two women, right? Serious age gap. However, the size, the other anthropomorphics are going to favor Jessica Penne here. And if you guys have not been around for a long time, you may not know that Jessica Penne had a leave of absence, right? She, what's the polite way to say it? She changed her biological profile, according to USADA. Right? So I don't even know exactly what that means. I would assume that involves some testosterone, maybe some anti-estrogen products. Just who knows exactly what she was getting into. But Jessica Penne was doing the damn thing, right? She was trying to find a way to get a little competitive advantage, and she had to sit on the sidelines for a while. So she came back, and she's had mixed results, right? She's 14-7 as a pro. Certainly not a world beater is Jessica Penne. But do I think she's live in this fight? I'm just going to level with you guys right off the rip. Absolutely, I do. She's 3-5 in the UFC. Not an inspired record. Not an inspiring record. She's 41 years of age. That's a huge red flag. But with all those things being said, let's talk about it. Tabitha Ricci, guys, is a very solid prospect. I know a lot of people don't love Tabitha Ricci's game, but let's just talk about it, okay? She's 6-2 in the UFC. She's coming off of a unanimous decision win over Angela Hill, split decision win over Tisha Pennington, wins over Jillian Robertson, Jessica Penne, Polyana Viana, Maria Oliveira. She's done fine in the UFC. Her losses are against Lupita Godinez via split decision and Manon Fiorot, who is like one fight away from a title fight, if that. So I think you really got to give some credit and respect to Tabitha Ricci. Then you look at Emily Ducote, and Emily Ducote, I would say, has underperformed mightily in the UFC. She's got a good wrestling background. She's got a good grappling game. She's got some power in her kicks, but she just really hasn't shown up in the UFC. And I don't know if it's a lack of interest. I don't know if it's just this level of competition. I don't know what it's been, but I feel like she's given a lot of uninspired performances. She was certainly fired up the night she fought Jessica Penne. She went out there and won the early rounds. But even then, I thought it was a little bit more competitive than I expected it to be. And if you go back and look at that fight, guys, Emily Ducote was a slight favorite there, -165 it says, compared to a +135 on the comeback for a Jessica Penne. Then you look at, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, armbar in the first round for Jessica Penne, right? That was her most recent UFC win, and it was 2021. So it's been a little while. But then prior to that, she beat Lupita Godinez by split decision. I mean, that's a solid win. It was a weird one, right? If you go back and rewatch it, it was a weird fight. But despite Lupita Godinez being way stronger, way more physical, lifted her up, power bombed her, Jessica Penne found ways to pop out on her back, make it competitive, and find ways. I think she even busted up the nose at some point in that fight. So Jessica Penne, just a savvy vet, right? She lost to Danielle Taylor, horrible look. Got finished brutally by Jessica Andrade, who didn't at the time. Then Joanna Jędrzejczyk beat her up as well, busted her nose, crazy. And you look, 2017, guys, if you go back and look, we go from 2017 all the way to 2021. So she had that whole layoff, then she won 2 fights, she's lost 2 fights. She's 2-2 since making her return to the UFC. And here's the question I would pose to everybody. Lupita Godinez and Karolina Kowalkiewicz, those are both decent women, right? Those are both solid enough. Emily Ducote and Tabitha Ricci, those are both decent women. They're both solid enough. Elise Reed is probably the worst of the bunch, right? If I just had to level with you guys, she's 3-4 in the UFC. She got finished by Lupita Godinez. She got finished by Loma Lupunmi. She got finished by Sam Hughes. She got finished by Sijara Eubanks. Not a good record. Not a good record, guys. It's just not good. Beat Jinyu Frey, a win that doesn't age very well. Beat Melissa Martinez. I don't think she's fought since, so we don't really know how to evaluate that. And beat Corey McKenna, who's no longer with the company. And if you guys remember, we said nothing but love and respect for Corey McKenna. We wish her the best in media. And, if she wants to fight on the regional scene, if she wants to do whatever with her life, we wish her nothing but the best in all her future endeavors. But we mentioned on this show, and we mentioned in the past before she fought Emerim and these other girls, that we didn't think she was quite as good as people cracked her out to be, and we didn't think that she was quite of the UFC level that maybe people expected from her. And now if you look, guys, Corey McKenna, that split decision win, Corey was a huge favorite there. Right? So everybody was expecting her to do really well against Elise Reed, and it was a Corey McKenna underperformance. It wasn't Elise Reed looking so special, right? Then the Melissa Martinez fight. I think people had some expectations for Melissa, and she came in and underperformed them. I believe that was her UFC debut. So if we go back and look, that was her UFC debut. She was 0-1 now in the promotion, and she hasn't fought since. So then you look at her most recent fight, Jinyu Frey. I'm talking about most recent fight that she won. She beat Jinyu Frey via unanimous decision. Jinyu Frey is 11-10. She's barely hanging on to a 500 record as a professional, with all due respect. Then you look 2-6 in the UFC. She can't buy a win in the UFC, right? Jinyu Frey really, really struggled in the UFC. And if you look, she lost to Victoria Dudikova, unanimous decision. Lost to Elise Reed, unanimous decision. Got finished by Polyana Viana via KO1. Lost to Vanessa Demopoulos via a very close split decision. She beat Ashley Yoder and Gloria De Paula, who are both really abysmal UFC level fighters. And I don't take any pleasure in saying that. But Ashley Yoder's record in the UFC, if we're just calling a spade, let's pull up Ashley Yoder's record. Ashley Yoder was 3-8 in the UFC, one of the worst records that they will allow to have happen in the promotion. And Gloria De Paula, she did not have a very promising record either. 1-3 in the promotion. So 4 combined wins. I think 11 combined losses between the two of them. Just not very inspiring, right? I think that when you look at the overall body of work, Elise Reed just hasn't been beating people of the same ilk as Jessica Penne. She hasn't been fighting people of the same ilk all the time. And when she does, when she fights real solid women, real prospects, Lupi Godinez finished in the second. Loma Lukbunmi finished in the second. Sam Hughes finished in the third. Sajara Eubanks finished in the first. Stepped up on short notice, up a weight class there. So for me, Elise Reed, her ground game is nothing special. It's a work in progress at best. I think she could get submitted here. I think she could get planted on her back and exposed from the bad positions on the ground. I just don't rate her ground game at all. So for me, if she's able to sprawl brawl, keep it upright the whole time, 15 minutes, maybe she wins and makes it look easy. Maybe she even clips Jessica Penne, who's 41 years of age. But frankly, I have never seen anything that I was really blown back by Elise Reed. I'm not super impressed by her performances, and yeah, that's just the way I see it. So we wish her nothing but the best, New Jersey girl. But I don't rate her. I don't see it. And I think Jessica Penne, despite her age, is a live underdog in this one. So that's the way I see that fight going down. Let's go ahead and pull up the next fight. Okay, we got 2 fights left, guys. And I will be very brief on this fight. Less than a minute, probably. Okay? Elise Ardelean is 0-1 in the UFC, as is Melissa Martinez, okay? She lost to Shauna Bannon, and frankly, guys, that's an unacceptable loss, right? That's not a very good loss at all. It was a split decision. It was close. It probably should have went her way, if my memory serves. I think Shauna Bannon might have robbed her blind, if my memory serves. But in any case, Melissa Martinez got beat by Elise Reed, who I don't rate, right? I just described why I don't rate her. So I don't like this fight. I don't have any plans on really betting this fight. I will say the big social media A side is Elise Ardelean. She's huge on a lot of social media platforms, but is she a very good fighter? I don't think so. On the other side is Melissa Martinez, probably a more natural fighter. Yes. Does that mean she's going to win this one? No. So I don't really love this fight. I'm pretty put off this fight. So I'll do my tape. I'll do my due diligence. I'll give a write-up that I can try and be proud of. But do I know anything about these women off the top of my head? The answer is no. I really don't. And Elise Ardelean is the massive A side, but she's not really a fighter in the same traditional sense as Melissa Martinez. Comes from a fighting family, but I just don't know how talented she is, and she hasn't competed much recently. So pretty clear first win for the brother-sister combo in the UFC. That sounds about right, my man. XBL on Twitch says, we appreciate you, bro. It's always my pleasure. Charlie Zelenoff says, Liam, your sound is a bit low. I apologize, my man. Working on getting it better, but right now it's just not where we want it to be. So I apologize for that. If you need to turn it up, I encourage you to turn it up. But I just, I have a shitty microphone right now, and I'm going to make that change as soon as I possibly can. All right, guys. Last but not least, we got Robelis Despaigne taking on Austen Lane. And if you guys saw, we talked about on the Contender Series breakdowns, Yadier Devalle. I thought he was a live underdog at plus 116. He was the Cuban problem. And there's another Cuban problem. The big boy, Robelis Despaigne. He was in attendance at the UFC Apex on Tuesday to root on Yadier Devalle. Yadier Devalle, if you guys missed that fight, had an absolutely sensational performance. One of the most dominant underdog wins you will see on Contender Series. Walked the guy down, beat him up, took him down, threatened with the chokes, beat him up against the fence, nearly knocked him out in the second round, put an absolute shellacking on him, 100-plus significant strikes. So I thought that was really impressive. I thought it was a great showing, and Robelis Despaigne was there to support the guy, right? If you look at Austen Lane, I don't like his game. I don't like what he brings to the table. He's got a good athleticism. He's got a good background. But if you look, guys, NFL players, former football players, just by and large, their propensity to get knocked out in meme-like fashion is higher, right? In these heavyweight divisions, whether it's Brendan Schaub, whether it's, I'm trying to think of other really good prime examples. Greg Hardy, right? These guys, they're just not quite cast iron because they've already been hit in the head so many times in their life and their career, in my humble opinion. And especially in the heavyweight division where one zig when you should have zag, it could really cost you your consciousness, right? And if you look at this matchup, Robelis Despaigne, I don't think is a perfect fighter at all. But what he does bring to the table is Robelis Despaigne. Oh, great point. Uncle Weezy says Zach Palga. How about Dominic Reyes, right? Played high-level ball at Stony Brook, and his chin seemed to deteriorate at a younger age. Now he looks like he's a little bit back in form. We called him with that comeback win. We were happy to see that for him, but yeah, he's definitely been a guy that struggled with that as well. Great pull from Uncle Weezy. And shout out to Uncle Weezy, a very sharp guy with great content himself in the space. It's always a pleasure to hear from Uncle Weezy in the chat. So shout out to you. Shout out to Brian, XBL. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to everybody who's still rocking with us. We are talking at 3:19 a.m. local time. You guys know that we always keep that same energy. We keep the same passion and enthusiasm. We're still sipping the coffee if we need to. Whatever it takes to get the job done. But in any case, we're dealing with Robelis Despaigne, the big boy. What does he bring to the table at 36 years of age? He's a freak athlete, guys. He's been hitting the chin infrequently, right? He's got a good chin. In his last fight, the truth is, if he had a bad chin, Waldo would have knocked him out because Waldo was on top of him in a good position, pounding him with ground and pound at the end of that fight. If you guys, again, haven't followed me on Twitter at Liam Picks Fights, that's where I post a lot of content throughout the week. I really encourage you guys to find me there. But I also posted plus 200 Waldo Cortez Acosta. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, that was a great bet, and I regret only putting one unit on it. I was scared that Waldo was going to just engage in the boxing and make it a really competitive fight. But instead, he took the path of least resistance and took this guy down and exposed him. He has no ground game. He has no ability to get back up from the bottom position against somebody that really knows what they're doing. And Waldo is a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that had been fighting in mixed martial arts for a lot longer, right? He fought Thomas Peterson, a guy who actually knows how to wrestle, a guy who tried to take him down many times. I had seen Waldo wrestle and compete for 15 minutes. This guy, Robelis, was like 4 minutes of his whole career. You knew nothing about him. What do I know about him now? He doesn't want to quit at the first sign of adversity, right? If a lot of guys, when they get put on their back, guys, I'll just tell you, a lot of heavyweights, they're quitting. Period, point blank. Look at Greg Hardy against Marcin Tybura. The guy does this right here. Watch me. He's looking into the camera like he's seeing a ghost because he was a white belt being put on bottom for the first time against a big man, and he's putting these big blockers up, and he's still getting hit clean, and he didn't know what hit him, right? That, for me, is kind of the problem with these heavyweights, right? They come over, and they're not used to being on the ground, and so if anybody knows the wrestle, the jiu-jitsu, they beat them really easy. Like, if you are Jailton Almeida, you make a career going out there and picking off every heavyweight 5 through 15 who can't stop a takedown. They don't know how to wrestle. They're amateurish on the ground. You put them in one submission position and the fight is over. And that's typically been his plan of attack, right? You look at a guy like Robelis Despaigne, and we saw him go out there, and nobody tried to take him down in the Josh Parisian fight. And he almost fell to his back. So I was like, if Waldo tries to take him down, he will take him down. And I was like, if he doesn't try and take him down like a fool, then he could probably compete on the feet and make it close. And instead, Waldo fought a really smart fight. And Waldo, by the way, has a good winning percentage in the UFC. He goes out there and gets after it. He's a smart guy, understands his own development in his career, played former professional baseball player. He's a serious athlete in his own right. And he just had way more experience. He was way savvier at the time. And I say all the time, timing is everything in mixed martial arts. You give me the younger guy who's got a professional boxing background, a professional baseball background against a taekwondo guy. Yeah, give me that every time, and we'll live with the results. We'll see how that shakes out. Meanwhile, now you've got I think it's bronze medalist or whatever the hell he is, right? A taekwondo medalist, a very solid Olympic level athlete. I mean, you want to give him hats off for that. Also, here, what's actually impressive about him? He can kick somebody in the head at heavyweight. Like, a lot of guys at heavyweight can't kick you in the head. If they could do it really slowly. It's very telegraphed. This guy could kick you in the head quickly, aggressively. But against Josh Parisian, he comes out, he goes for a head kick, and he falls onto his back, right? Like, the guy literally fell over by his own account. So when he got back up to his feet, he's running in reverse, right? He's running on a reverse treadmill on his tippy toes. And he absolutely knocked the guy dead. So it's just like, okay, this guy has the kind of power that if he's moving backwards, he doesn't have his feet set, and he hits you 1 or 2 times, you might just fall over. That's a really impressive, scary guy to deal with. If he kicks you in the head, you're going to sleep. Austen Lane can't take a punch. If you look at his career, that's been his biggest calling card and his biggest problem. So the UFC is trying to find a guy for Robelis Despaigne to bounce back with. Now, if you look at Austen Lane, he has one career win by submission. That's important to note. And he does have a bunch of wins by knockout, 11 as a matter of fact. He's 0-2 in the UFC with a no contest. He lost to Tafa twice, right? However you want to slice that one up. Then you look at the fact he went out there against Jonathan Diniz, and he found a takedown, I believe, in round 1. He got some control time. But what did he show? If we go back and look, and I will share this tab with you as well, so you guys can see what we're talking about. We always like to reference data as much as we can on the show. Try and give you guys a couple different things to think about. So we talk about the odds, we talk about the matchups, we talk about our opinions, we talk about some of the tape, but we also like to talk about the data points. And here we look at the fact, okay, we got a 6'7" Robelis Despaigne with a 4-inch reach advantage compared to just 80 inches for Austen Lane. He's also going to be, around the same age. So these guys are very similar in terms of, size and age and everything. So if you look at any advantages, I'd say it's Robelis Despaigne with the size. That's the biggest advantage here on paper. Then you look at the fact, okay, Austen Lane's got these better striking metrics, but I think the biggest difference between these two guys is if one of them lands and is more likely to find the knockout, I think it's very much likely to be Robelis Despaigne. The guys that Austen Lane has knocked out in his career, Richard Jacoby was 6-0-1, not very quality. Juan Adams is probably his best career win, a guy who was like a career letdown with all due respect. He lost to Vernon Lewis, got knocked out brutally in the LFA. He lost to Frank Tate, got knocked out brutally. That's a 5-5 fighter. He got knocked out by Greg Hardy in embarrassing fashion on the Contender Series as well. And then he's been knocked out by a Tafa brother. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The Tafa brothers, with all due respect, some of the worst to ever do it. God bless them. We love to watch them fight. They're fun, but they're some of the worst to ever do it. No ground game, no capacity to fight on the mat. And I think that when we saw, Austen Lane can't beat that guy. He can't beat Diniz, who's a kickboxer making the transition. I just don't think he's very good, right? I think he can win this fight, but I don't know that he's got the cardio to go 15. So is he going to finish this guy on the ground? Like, is he that much better than Waldo on the ground? Maybe. Do I see that, though? Not really. Like, I think Waldo would probably wash Austen Lane if they fought as well. I think he would be heavily favored. So I favor Despaigne. I think the way you try and get creative on this fight, and it's a weird, awkward position to be in, but you try and look for maybe a Despaigne round 2, a Despaigne round 3. We could see some extended minutes here. I do think Despaigne is easy to take down. I do not think he's very sophisticated there. But we saw if he doesn't check out at the first sign of adversity, maybe Lane takes him down, gasses out, and then gets finished in round 2, and then you get 5-1 on the return instead of minus 150 or whatever it is on KO1. So that's at least something to think about for a potential value angle, because we literally saw Diniz replicate that game plan last time, right? Deal with the takedowns early, then get this guy upright and knock him out because he doesn't have a good chin. And if you don't have a good chin at heavyweight, it's going to be a really hard time, right? Durability is one of the number one attributes you need in mixed martial arts, and I don't think Austen Lane has it. I think that Robelis Despaigne, for all of his flaws, probably does have it a little bit better. So I understand why people would play Lane. I think that, again, I don't lay chalk with guys like Robelis that have such huge glaring holes in their game. But could I see myself more so inclined at looking at some value props on Robelis than looking at Lane moneyline? Yeah, I could. I just don't trust Austen Lane to have a great game plan, to fight smart. And if he does, I don't trust him to do it for 15. And if he doesn't, I don't trust him to stay awake for 5. So that's just the way I see it. I hope he wrestles if I take the round 2, because otherwise he's going to get knocked out in the first round, I think, more often than not. But that's the way I see it for this whole UFC card, guys. What I'm going to do overnight, I am going to do the following, okay? First and foremost, I'm going to timestamp this video so people can go back and watch if they want to check out the breakdown I did on the main event. If you guys missed it, I did a lengthy breakdown on the main event. If you're interested in my thoughts on the PFL main event, I also did some thoughts on the PFL main event, which is something I don't always do on this channel. If you guys are interested in more of that, please let me know down in the comment section below. The more comments there are, the more likely it is that we're going to talk more PFL on the show. So if it matters to you, if it's important to you, that's a great way to make your voice heard, and I really appreciate it. Additionally, guys, if you have questions, comments, concerns, you can get at me in the comment section down below about any of the above. However, also, guys, if you want to talk, like I said, PFL, if you want to talk more UFC, whatever it is, go ahead and let me know in the comment section. The other thing is, on Patreon, there's ways to direct message me. If you have questions, comments, concerns. Somebody earlier in the week asked me what were my thoughts on the Nicolau fight, and we got into it a little bit, talking through it. They kind of liked the Nicolau side. I gave a little bit of my reservations. A lot of people use me as a resource. In addition, they believe in their own process, which is what I always say. Do your own research in this life. It'll always make you feel better if you put, your money behind positions you feel proud of. However, I'll always try and steer you in the direction I think is smart, in the direction I think is wise. If there's pushback that I think needs to be given, I'll give it to you. Then you make your own decisions. Everybody's an adult. Everybody is, smart and calculated about how they want to approach this game. So for me, my goal is always to put people in a position to succeed, try and give them the best information I can, try and give them my true, honest thoughts and feelings. And sometimes I'll be right, sometimes I'll be wrong, but I'll always be here with my ass in the jackpot each and every time to do it all again next week. So unfortunately, last week, our guy Tatsuro Taira came up just short, right? Main event, split decision loss. I thought it was a unanimous L, if you're asking me, right? I give 3 rounds to Royval, 2 rounds to my guy Taira. I thought best case scenario was a draw, maybe a 10-8 in round 2, something like that. But ultimately, Royval showed his heart, his grit, his toughness. I thought the same was said for Tatsuro Taira on the other side, right? Was able to deal with the adversity, got hurt in round 3. We saw that championship hard. A lot of people said after that fight, what I've been saying since the guy got to the UFC, future world champion, just wasn't his night on the night. So I think that this week we've got another great set of fights at the Apex. I'm going to be selective with my spots, but my goals are as follows, right? Overnight, I want to get my main card thoughts outlined. I'm going to be doing my tape study in depth on those main card fights, getting my write-ups prepared for Roto Grinders. All the patrons and the people on the channel memberships, they will see that before they go live anywhere else. So before they get posted on Roto Grinders, as I'm writing up my articles, they will be available for people to see. If you're interested in the live write, I do write these things live for people to watch as well. We do have people sometimes in there, 3-4 people viewing as I'm writing these out. And you'll see my thoughts changing in real time because as I'm writing out my breakdowns, as I'm writing out my analysis, to write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard. I'm drawing a blank on whose quote that is, but y'all can look it up for yourself. To write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard. And for me, I'm always trying to write well, think clearly to get good analysis on these fights. I think at my best, I do some of the best write-ups in the business, but each time, the bookie's not going to pay you for the work you did last week. The write-ups you did last week that were good aren't going to get you through on this week's fight card. So one thing that I want to do before we close out the show, guys, is go over a little bit of Dana White Contender Series. And if you guys haven't been rocking with the Dana White Contender Series breakdowns, no problem. But I think that we've really done a pretty solid job in terms of week to week coming up with good strategies for how to bet on these fight cards, right? In the state of New York, unfortunately, unable to bet on these fight cards. I got to go to New Jersey. I got to find ways, to get around it, either going offshore outlets, these kind of things. But each and every week, I put together my breakdowns, my thoughts on all of the fights with the same amount of effort and intensity. And if you look, this is, a fight where Nicolau via sub and the fight ends via sub were the top 2 props that I recommended on this fight card. So if you look, this is the first fight of the night, and I always talk about the trends, the prospect status, how they both match up. So I try and give a full breakdown of the fight, but then the props to consider. Nicolau sub plus 500 cashed, 16.7% implied win probability. The ends via sub cashed at plus 205, 32.8% implied win probability. And I gave all my reasons. It was plus EV to other books. Nicolau 2-0 to the sub props, 2 most recent wins via stoppage. Adu 4-0 to the sub prop, 4-fight submission win streak. Best market prices, but also we go through the analysis, right? I actually predicted him to win, not just value on the line. I predicted him to win via submission, and I gave the reasons I thought why. He's bigger, he's more experienced, he comes from a superior regional scene. And if you look back, Adu's not a quitter, but I'd seen him in an armbar. I'd seen him in dangerous situations. So what I always try and do is use my tape study to try and find plus EV angles, plus EV opportunities. The bigger guy who I thought had slightly better grappling in a fight where I expected both guys to grapple really aggressively and go for the finish. For me, ends by sub was tremendous value at plus 205. Nicolau by sub was tremendous value at plus 500, and we nailed the prediction. So that's always the goal, right? If we can write well and think clearly, then we get good analysis and good outcomes. And it's not like if you were on the Adu side, we had nothing for you, right? Like we said, it's all Nicolau fuck Adu, he has no chance. I said, if you like the Adu side, the way I'd look at it is unconventional. The KO at plus 950. It's still a welterweight fight. It's still two big guys going out there, right? It's like, let's see how these guys shake out and if it plays out on the feet. Fights can play out a lot of different ways. You could snipe value a couple different ways. But for me, I always try and identify what's the most likely outcome, what's the way I see the fight going, and then see, is there a valuable way to lean into that angle? We can go through each fight on the card because I didn't get them all right. I did get this next one right as well. I thought Julieta Martinez would win the fight. I predicted her to win. However, I thought things would get dicey late. A lot of people were thinking it was going to be a blowout, myself included. I thought she was going to finish early, but my whole thought was she's going to come out early. She's going to start hot. And if she doesn't get the finish, she might have, a difficult time sustaining the pace. Instead, she started slow in round one. She was kind of a little bit jittery. She dealt with those first round nerves from being a UFC debutante at just 21, 20 years of age, whatever it was. But it did go to a split decision. And that was in my analysis. Again, when you look, I said Hernandez round 3 split decision. Did I see a split decision when I was watching it? Not necessarily, but I have a decent feel for some of these dynamics. If it's a WMMA fight and you think it's going to be, 2 rounds to 1, then just know going in that it could easily be a split decision because the judges have been atrocious in mixed martial arts this year. Guys, the split decision props have been hitting off the charts. So again, when I'm talking about angles I'm looking for in the UFC moving forward, if I think it's a fight that's going to go to decision, could go to decision close, I'm definitely looking at these prices on the split decisions. I'm definitely looking at the prices on the fight, the underdogs to win by decision, these kind of things. Because, guys, they've been big plus money numbers, and they've been cashing with some decent regularity in recent UFC events. Maybe it's due for some regression, but I certainly think it's an interesting angle, especially with the bad judging we've seen recently. Split decisions plus EV. Then if you look through Yadier Davai, I mentioned it already, Robelis Despaigne in the corner. And this is a guy that we went out there and we saw value on all of his lines, right? It was that simple. I thought every line was wrong on the fight. If I think the money line's off at plus 116, then I'm probably going to think at least one of the props is off. But when I looked at it, I was like, the sub at plus 450, that should be plus 225. The ITD at plus 350, that should be plus 150. The decision at plus 300, that should be 2-1. And the money line should be minus 160. And he went out there and absolutely smoked this guy. I thought it was going to be a sub via guillotine choke in round 1 or 2. If y'all watched the Contender Series, tell me y'all didn't think I had it nailed. When he goes guillotine pull from the feet standing, I thought he had that, man. He had it very close. He had it tight. He had it, to the guy's chest. And nothing you could say but hats off to Montero. I thought Montero was drawing dead to a finish here. I thought he needed to finish Yadier Davai. We've seen Davai go out there against a very good fighter in Michael Aswell, a guy who I think will be in the UFC in the future. And he was able to go out there and out-wrestle him, out-position him, out-maneuver him, and win a 29-28 important close decision in his career. So for me, I thought he had the decision upside here. I thought Montero had to go out there and find a finish. He did have one good guillotine himself in the third round. He did have some good punches late in the third round as well. But ultimately, we just saw a class difference. Yadier Davai should have been favored, in my humble opinion. I think we saw that after the fact with way less professional experience. He just was the better guy by a country mile. So shout out to Yadier Davai. And then we look at the next couple fights. This is where I got it wrong, guys. Hats off to Luis Goruye. I was riding for my guy Nick Piccinini. If you guys watched the live stream, we tried to will him to victory. My guy, oh goodness, I got to pull it up. My guy, Bufo on the beat. He's a producer, guys, and he constantly is sending me these funny videos of things that he records on the show, and I'll definitely have to share more of them in the future. We got to get a soundboard together of all the silly things I've said on live stream. Be a legend and all these different things. But he put together a bunch of these clips and he sends them to me after the streams. And we were riding for Nick Piccinini. I gave him a lot of good content, unfortunately, with my rambles and my raves trying to will Nick Piccinini to victory. But Luis Garule would just not be denied, guys. He fought a great fight. He fought a smart fight. I thought the right guy won. I'm a big Nick Piccinini fan, but I always try and call it like I see it. I try not to bullshit you guys. And some people thought Nick Piccinini won the fight, which is how I know, hey, it was a competitive fight. It was a close fight, and it wasn't a blowout in any direction. Even a guy as biased as I am thought, hey, you know what? Garule won the fight, and other people disagree with me. But I'll just say this. The way I looked at it, Gurule, what he did really well, he threw a lot of volume, he kept pushing forward, and he did not accept being taken down. Guys, one thing that's really defining about a lot of wrestlers, they just do not accept being put on the bottom position. That's the right attitude. It's the right mindset to have for mixed martial arts. If you accept being on the bottom, it's more likely you lose the decision. It's more likely you lose the fight. If you resist being on the bottom, it's more likely you come back. It's more likely you win the fight. And this guy, Luis Gurule, made him more tired by resisting being on bottom. He was able to keep getting back up to his feet. And even though he got tired a little bit late, even though he got taken down by Nick Piccinini late, Nick was a little bit too aggressive on top. He rushed the position a little bit. He lost the position, and he was unable to get back there. So he got to the mount late in that fight, and he should have been able to hold position and either finish or win the fight from the top position there. And unfortunately, his eagerness, he just blew it, right? He just got a little too excited, let the guy back up to his feet, and he didn't have enough energy to go for that takedown again. So he got a couple really smart takedowns, guys. Those reshots from the knee into the knee pick. I mean, it was just gorgeous wrestling. Nick Piccinini is fantastic to watch. His takedowns were on point all night. I said he would out-wrestle him. He out-wrestled him all night. But the difference was Luis Gurule, it wasn't a wrestling match. You're not getting points for the 2-point takedown. So every time he would pop back up to his feet, Nick Piccinini would be a little bit more tired and a little bit more disheartened, and this guy, Luis Gurule, was able to just keep pushing. So Luis, hats off to him. Great fighter, really good talent, and I said in a tweet that I put out last night, he's one of the top talents to come off the Contender Series. If you could push that pace for 15 minutes and you could wrestle that hard, I can just tell you guys, there's very few guys that can wrestle like that in the division, right? Like, that can wrestle like Nick Piccinini. Guys aren't doing that. I'm just telling you. So Nick's wrestling is sensational. The rest of his games, his ancillary tools, just need to be improved, right? And ultimately, I thought that the path for him in this fight was a TKO late. I thought he was going to need to take this guy down and get him into the mount. He did a lot of what I thought, but it was against the guy that was the wrong guy at the wrong time, in the wrong place, who was too prepared, who wanted it too bad, who was too skilled, and Nick wasn't ready. So I think he can be ready in the future. I think he's a great fighter, and I think he's a great prospect. But ultimately, I thought he could have come up short against Duffy. I thought he did come up short against Gurule, and I think it's back to the drawing board. It's a tough weight class. It's a tough, grind, right? But if he wants to be serious about this, I think he can get there. I think he can make the right steps and take a step in the right direction. But if you notice, guys, I tried to be very fair before this. Both of these guys are very solid prospects. This is before the fight, right? Not after the fight. This isn't hindsight bias. I was being very fair. I said that Pitch is a blue chip prospect, 3-time All-American at a pedigree wrestling program, high-level athlete environment. Gurule is a solid wrestler himself with Greco-Roman athletes, but a lower pedigreed athlete. That's true, and he just none of that mattered on the night, right? He just showed up and showed out. So here's the one thing I wanted to note. I talked about Piccinini KO and the ITD. I thought those were the valuable ways to play him. Ultimately, I was just wrong about those angles, but I think you guys, at least if you watch the fight, I think you can see where I was coming from with Piccinini KO in round 3 when he's on top of the guy in the mount in the 3rd round, looking to go off on him with ground and pound. For me, I thought that was his upside, and he also went for the sub in the 1st round. In terms of the ITD, that's the upside there. He went out there, he was aggressive, he knew he needed a finish to get Dana White's attention. He couldn't get it, and ultimately that was the way it was. But when you look at how I thought Gurule would have to get it done, I thought it was Gurule KO or Gurule decision, and I thought he would have to get a narrow decision if he won it. He did win a narrow decision. It was very close, but I said Gurule's paths to victory is to either outstrike him on the feet because Piccinini's still a work in progress and he could get chinned. We saw him narrowly grind out a decision last time on Contender Series. And Gurule, guys, was 3-0 to the decision. Now he's 4-0 to the decision after that fight. So the guy is really special in my view. And he's 1-0 to the sub. He's gone out there and responded to adversity well. He's a tough son of a bitch. So for me, I think Luis Gurule has real potential, and hats off to him, right? If you guys see, I'll always do this as well. If I'm biased, I'll let you know. And on that betting guide that I did for patrons, for people that are channel members, I appreciate each and every one of you guys. I did disclose New York biases. I'm biased as shit. This guy won a New York State title when I was there as a fan watching my sophomore year of high school. That's how long I go back with the Nick Piccinini story. So I've been rooting for Nick for a long time. I will continue to root for him, but unfortunately, I'll call a spade a spade. He wasn't ready this time. He wasn't ready this season, and I hope he comes back ready next time. And that's just the way it is. Then last up, guys, Nick Klein and Geraldo Souza. This one is crazy because the more tape I watched on Nick Klein, the more I became unsure he would win the fight. But I was not sold on Geraldo Souza at all. I had said before the fight, classic Evolução Thai fighter, swings like a wild man, not afraid to exchange, sells out for grappling holds, doesn't manage his pace well, went to a draw based on extreme exhaustion, fleeing his opponent, pulling guard more than one time. I did not like what I saw from this guy. He did seem to be a competent ground player when he was fresh. And then if you look back, Klein had been broken down the stretch before. A Canadian guy by the name of Doron Dokaj was able to outwork him, outlast him, beat him up over the course of 15 minutes. And he also got beat up by a wrestler back in the day, Niall Bartling, on the amateur scene. But if you look, his win over Colin Huckbody kind of showed the blueprint for how he would win, I thought, which was go get to his rear naked choke after this guy gets tired. Instead, guys, Nick Klein shoots himself out of a cannon and absolutely chases this guy down. And if you look, the props to consider, I thought it was Sousa in the early rounds or Klein sub / either by sub. Picking the guy by sub and the ends by sub, that was a super profitable angle for me on this card, eh? If you look at the top, we did very well with Mikalev, and then if you look at the bottom, we did well with Klein, sub plus 600, either sub plus 200, and the reasons being 2-0 to the sub, pushes the grappling in all of his fights, decent wrestling and back-taking instincts. Yeah, tell me about those back-taking instincts. He went out there and choked that guy in 30 seconds. That was absolutely insane. And unfortunately, guys, I listed off Klein late sub props. I should have listed the round 1 sub prop as well. Disgusting. It could have been an insane plus EV read if I had put that one out there. But yeah, ultimately, I just thought Geraldo Souza was probably going to win, but he was not trustworthy at all. And he showed exactly why he was not trustworthy. Absolutely insane. Just got cleaned up instantly. So hopefully we see Geraldo Souza back next year. You'd hate to see him only get that one chance and blow it so horribly. But I think that he's a guy that is not super good, but is a fun action fighter. And so he'll probably be back in a crazy action fight next year. But this guy Klein told Dana White he likes John Jones. So easy ticket for him into the UFC. That's what we have, guys. We've talked now about Contender Series. That was week number 10. We've wrapped it up. What I wanted to do is just quickly close out our conversation with this, which is let's talk about the tweet that I was referencing before, okay? The best prospects that I think we saw this season of Contender Series. And you guys let me know. If you think somebody was the best prospect that you saw this season of Contender Series, let me know right now in the chat, a top 5, whatever kind of format that you guys want to do. A couple of sharp guys I respect. My guy Dan, Best Fight Picks, he was putting up his top 5, people essentially that he thought was coming off the program. Same thing with my guy Dravey. I think he started the what's the right word for it? The trend, right? He got that wave going. And looking at it, my guy VB MMA Picks, he's another person that posted his list. So a lot of great lists available online. I posted a few different things that you guys can go back and look if you're interested, which is number 1, I posted my list. I'm about to show that on screen. So here we go. Let's go ahead and show this on screen so you guys have an idea of what we're talking about. And hopefully this is a good reason for you guys to go ahead. Oh, I just hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Hopefully this is a good reason for you guys to go ahead and get subscribed on Twitter, right? Go ahead and find us over on Twitter at Liam Picks Fights, right? This is my account, same as my YouTube profile picture, so it should be easy continuity for you guys to find me. But I listed off in no particular order the best prospects from Dana White Contender Series this season, okay? And for my money, these are the guys that are going to perform best in the UFC. Now, there's a few other guys that are honorable mentions, and we'll talk about them too. But right now, let's talk about the people that made the list. Loner Kavanaugh, guys, knockout of the season. Am I wrong? This guy went out there and absolutely delivered a huge knockout over Antoine Ho. And in my opinion, guys, Antoine Ho is like the number 1 guy that I want to see back from this crop of fighters. He was 6-0 as a pro, I believe. Loner Kavanaugh, 6-0 as a pro. Something had to give. And unfortunately, Loner Kavanaugh got the first round knockout. Antoine Ho got delivered there. But young guy, very capable. He will be back, in my opinion, on Contender Series next year. And I think that when you look at Loner Kavanaugh, he showed ready for prime time, big knockout. He's taking on a fun fighter in Jose Ochoa. That's coming up in November, I believe. Should be an absolute banger, guys. Look forward to that fight. Mark your calendars right now. Loner Kavanaugh coming to the UFC. Fun guy, fun striker, great knockout ability. You're going to want to watch him when he's competing. Then Mansour Abdul Malik. What else do I say but freak athlete? This guy's got the ability to take people down. He's strong, physical, knockout power, whether that's with the hands on the feet or whether that's taking people to the ground and beating them up. I think Mansour Abdul Malik, in terms of his athletic prowess, he's one of the most dangerous and dynamic fighters that we saw come through this season. Still very green at just 6-0. I think that when you give him a little more experience, Mansour Abdul Malik will be a problem for people, and they're not going to want to deal with him. You don't want a guy like that grabbing a hold of you. He's going to change your life. He's going to pick you up, turn you sideways, and there's going to be fuck all that you can do about it. When you look at Malcolm Wellmaker, another guy who just seems really sharp, composed, well put together, well-rounded skill set coming into the UFC. I think Malcolm Wellmaker represents a real problem for a lot of guys. He's going to be able to stick them with the long, fast strikes, knockout ability, submission ability, in my opinion, that's underrated. I think he's going to be a problem for everybody. 8-0, undefeated professional record, fantastic. Cody Haddon already got a UFC win under his belt. This guy's moving fast. And by the way, we called the club and sub against Billy Brand on the Contender Series. And then we called him to get the win over Dan Argueta in his UFC debut as well. So had nothing but faith and belief in the Cody Haddon side so far, and it's paid off. 8-1 as a pro. Only lost a very respectable one on the Aussie regional scene. These Aussie guys have been coming to play. They've been coming ready out of the box, ready to get wins in the UFC. I think this is another one in Cody Haddon, who's got a lot of experience as a martial artist pre-UFC, coming up through the ranks. And I think these Aussie guys, like I mentioned, they're ready to go right now. Austen Lane, guys, top prospect, 13-0. Unbelievable professional record. The guy's gone out there, and if you look, he's fought serious guys, and he's beaten them. He takes them down. He can submit them. If he gets stuck on the feet, it's probably going to be a longer night at the office for a guy like Austen Lane, but so far it's been so good. Low center of gravity, knows where his bread is buttered, knows where to take the fights, can go out there, touch, and go, and he's fast, man. He's got an ability to fight on the feet as well. I think this Austen Lane kid is a pretty serious competitor, and he's going to be a problem for people. Shout out to Gold Caps in the chat. The mic is low. We're just pushing through, my man. You got to turn up the volume. The mic is shitty. I'm getting a new mic. It's the way it is right now. I apologize for the inconvenience and the crappy audio quality, but we talked about it off the rip. Then if you look, Dr. Nurgozayev, guys, 10-0. This is an impressive prospect. This is a guy who, in my view, he's got some ability to fight on the ground. He's got some ability to fight on the feet. I think that Dr. Nurgozayev, I was surprised that he was like minus 125 when he was on the Contender Series. I think that if you look at this guy, he could be a real problem for people if he can continue to develop that athleticism, right? So shout out to my guy Gold Caps. Thank you so much for the understanding, brother. And I think of a guy like Dr. in a weight class that's weak. I think he's got skills and athleticism to probably carry him a little bit. If he was in a tougher weight class, maybe we wouldn't put him on this list. But I think weight class dependent, that's always something important to consider. And then also, guys, we got Louis Garule, 10-0, okay? So Louis Garule, one of the last guys to make it on the show, but comes in at 10-0, never lost. I've seen him dropped, rally back, and win the fight. So he could get dropped. He could get knocked out in this division. But he's got great wrestling, and he's got great pace. He's got good volume on the feet. He's going to be a tough out, I think, for a lot of guys in the UFC. And you could tell he's got a winning quality about him in terms of the confidence, the willingness to keep coming forward. He keeps finding ways to win decisions, 4-0 now in his 10-0 career. To the decisions, got some knockouts on his record as well. Submission win as well, showed a little bit of well-rounded abilities. Cornered Brandon Royval in a 5-round fight. He's getting a lot of good experience, and Brandon Royval says he's a tough training partner to go with. He could take his back in live training scenarios. A couple people mentioned that in my live chats as well. So I think that all that bodes nothing but well for this guy moving forward. And for me, those are the top prospects coming off the season of Dana White Contender Series. Who are some guys that we didn't mention that people are really fired up about? I think that in the heavyweight division, it's Rizvan Kuniev. Listen, until I see this guy fight for 15 minutes against somebody I believe in, I won't really get there. Him, Veretikov, the guy who fought Alex Pereira. Those two guys, I need to see a little bit more. I need to see it against UFC guys. I need to see it in longer fights. Those are the things for me where they might be great prospects, but I just can't really evaluate them based on what we've seen so far. I don't think they faced meaningful enough resistance. I thought that Kuna guy was just no good. I expected more from him, and he just looked like he didn't want to be in there. He got hit with one knee to the body. Didn't look like he was serious about fighting like some of these other guys. I think that Cody Steele is a great prospect, but the striking defense that we saw from him was it left a little bit to be desired, right? I thought if he goes out there and brings his grappling to bear in his UFC fights, maybe we're having a different conversation. But based on what we saw so far, willing to go out there and exchange a little bit too much on the feet for my liking. And I do think he could get clipped like that. But at 155, with his power, with his ability, I certainly think he's somebody to reckon with. You do not want to get in there with Cody Steele. He's very well-rounded and dangerous in all positions. I think that those are most of the guys. Let's go ahead and look at some of these other lists from sharp guys I respect, like my guy Dan, Best Fight Picks, Malcolm Wellmaker, Jacoby Smith, one name that I forgot. Teammate to Nick Piccinini, absolute stud from Oklahoma State in terms of his wrestling career. Then you saw what he did in the Contender Series, dropped the knee behind the knee, really blew out his opponent's knee. And then also went to work with the ground and pound, went to work on the feet, showed his aggression, showed his relentless ability. I think that he is a great name to shout out as well. I don't know if this was in particular order. Then we look at my guy, Dravi. Again, another great guest that's been on the show plenty of times. We'd love to hear from him always. He mentioned Kevin Vallejos, a guy who I think has pretty boxing, very crisp striking. I just want to see Kevin Vallejos in an extended fight as well. He's a guy that kills people early. He went out there and performed great against John Silva in the first round. But then we saw Lord Silva take over in rounds 2 and 3. And I do think that we've had some questions about Kevin Vallejos in extended fights because he's a guy that shows that ability in short fights, in round 1 fights. He comes out like a bat out of hell. But can he keep it up if somebody offers him meaningful resistance? That, for me, is an open question. Quillen Salkid as well. He put them as a number 1 prospect, which is a little surprising to me, but should he be an honorable mention? Absolutely. Guy came prepared to shoot, I think it was 13 takedowns or something like that, 11 takedowns on Gage Young, who's a talented fighter, who's a guy I respect, who's a guy who's got a solid resume for a young fighter as well. And I do think he'll be back, right? I think he's another guy that's going to be back on Contender Series next year. So shout out, to these great lists from, guys that are friends of the show, guys that we've had on before. And I encourage you guys, I've retweeted all of those posts. If you guys like this kind of content, if you enjoy these kind of conversations and you want to, continue them outside of YouTube, then go ahead and find me on Twitter at Liam Picks Fights. I don't want to show any video or anything that's going to get me, bounced in terms of copyright infringement. But I encourage you guys, if you're into, the Contender Series and want to have a beat for some fighters that might be back next year, you want to get your early research done, I put together a thread. And I think the first 4 weeks are worth going back to, right? Week number 5, it was a weird week of the Contender Series. And honestly, I thought the best fighter from that week who didn't really get an opportunity was Kamel Otoni. And Kamel Otoni basically told the matchmakers, like, this career isn't for me. I don't want to do this. So if that's the case, he's probably never going to be back, right? But I do think that in terms of skill for skill and what he brought to the table, I would have loved to see him get an opportunity in the UFC. I did think he was UFC ready in terms of his skills. He was going to be fighting Cody Steele. That would have been a brutal matchup for him. But if there's anything we know, he's not afraid when he's in the pocket to stand there and trade with people. He did it with Alex Poatan Pereira, for the love of all things holy. If there's anything that tells us, it's that he's got balls of steel. But you look at Antoine Ho, right? Another guy I mentioned. He's now 6-1 as a pro. He got knocked out by Loner Kavanaugh. Is he done now? Is he not a prospect anymore? No, I think he's a huge prospect. And I go through fight by fight why I think these guys should have another opportunity next year. The person I think is the most deserving, I mentioned some honorable mentions from different weeks as well. But if that gets to 50 likes, right? It's at like 36 or 37 right now. If it gets to 50, I'll do week 6 through 10. But it was a lot of time, effort, and energy. So I want to make sure that people really care about this kind of content if I'm going to put extra time, effort, and energy into social media content. But I really think it's worthwhile. I think it's cool and interesting. And I go fight by fight. I provide video of like a cool knockout or something cool that they've done in the past. And it's because the reason I love Contender Series is prospects watch. I like understanding prospects before they get to the UFC. I like having a better feel than the rest of the market for who's going to win these contests. And it doesn't always work out perfectly, but one of the reasons I had a great run with Tatsuro Taira, and I know it came to an end last weekend. I always say, celebrate the wins, own the losses. But after losing about 3 units or 2.5 units, whatever it was on Taira last week, what we saw was that, I'm still plus 20 some odd units on Taira. Right, so if you get in on the right time on a fighter and build up with their winning streak, you can ride it until it falls off, right? And I think about, these fighters from Contender Series as some of them are real legit prospects and some of them maybe not quite that, right? Maybe they fall a little bit short of that. So for me, this is a great way to try and go through and do talent evaluation and see if we can get an early beat on the market. So that's a couple of cool things for you guys to check out. If you're interested in more content from me, go ahead and find all the stuff that I do clipped on this channel. I'm going to have clips from this video posted later. If you guys want a full PFL breakdown, if I get 10 comments below this video that say PFL, please PFL, something like that, PFL breakdown, I will do a PFL breakdown, but only if there's viewer interest, only if people actually care. So drop a comment if you want a full PFL breakdown. Otherwise, we got the main card breakdown out there now. What to expect from me if you're on Patreon and channel memberships, I will be working on tonight, finishing up the previous performance and odds range, getting together the main card write-ups for tomorrow. That will be done either sometime overnight or tomorrow. And then I'll have a full card write-up, every fight on the card, 11 fights, all broken down, all my ideas, whatever I end up betting on. All of that stuff will be available for you guys. And if you just want to tune in for bets and banter, for the weekly live streams, for us going live during the fights, hey, I appreciate you being here. I really appreciate the time, effort, and energy that you guys give. If you're a part of the sharpest chat in the game, God bless you. Thank you so much for your contributions. If you only participate in the comment section down below, hey, I appreciate that too. However you interact with the show, it means the world to me. If you're looking for me outside of the show, you can find me everywhere at Liam Picks Fights. It's the easiest way to find me. And like I said, any other information you need is down in the description box below. God bless, good luck, and until next time, come back and we're having all the same fun again. Thank you all so much. Take care, everybody. Have a great night. Cheers.